Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 1601, Unfathomable. Master Feng's wrinkled face snarled as he attacked with an uppercut move, which Zen barely dodged. Ha ha Zen, come again, he exclaimed with a toothy smile. He dashed forward again as his hand moved faster and faster, while the streams of mighty strength became increasingly denser. The powerful strength he displayed had a unique origin. It was known as the divine mighty strength, and it was one of the transcendent divine might of the celestial position. It exhibited a fearsome capacity even though he was just casually using it. Master Feng's beady eyes were serious. The streams of mighty strength were incomparably sharp under the claw of his hand. At that moment, a violent, wind-like ear-splitting sound erupted in the air. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The long, tendril-like streams of mighty strength slithered like numerous black snakes towards Zen. 80% of his strength. Meanwhile, Supreme Lord Sky froze at the sight of the snake-like formation of the mighty strength. It's 100%. Master Feng has already gone all out. If Zen really can take it, then that would be too outrageous. On the other hand, Supreme Lord Mirage shook his head in disbelief. He thought that Master Feng had gone too far. Everyone clearly knew how strong Master Feng was. He was an existence who was on the same level as Supreme Lord of Original Sin, Supreme Lord of Oracle, and Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment. Heck, he might be even more powerful than them. However, what set the Supreme Lords apart were the heavenly destinies they carried. Master Feng currently skipped using his own heavenly destiny. Then again, he still possessed an immense strength even with only his own martial arts skills. Even if it was an ordinary Supreme Lord who had fought him, they would have had to go all out. And Zen, who stood opposite of Master Feng, had just become a world lord not too long ago. Would he really be able to take it? The air tensed as the mighty strength pounced ferociously towards Zen like heavy but stealthy black snakes. In turn, Zen's gaze flickered as the 9 stars in his cinnabar field began to rotate slowly. In reality, Master Feng's strength was nothing to Zen. In terms of pure strength, he should be on par with Chapman in the Divine Refinement Forbidden Land, even if he was a Supreme Lord. However, Zen still activated the power of the 9 stars just to be safe. When the cluster of small snakes formed from the mighty strength neared Zen, he still stretched out his right hand, his right index finger protruded forward and his thumb raised slightly. Just when the small snake at the helm charged towards Zen, he shook his hand slightly and precisely caught the small snake's head in his hand. Then, he gave it a light pinch. Crack, the small, formerly swift snake was now broken into pieces. Right after the snake was gone, Zen's hand transformed into a series of shadows which constantly moved in front of him. Although there were numerous densely packed snakes, only Zen's touch was needed for them to die in an instant. Crack, 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 cracking sounds continuously filled the air like an endless line of dominoes. The Supreme Lords who saw Zen's technique thought this was ingenious. It was perfect in all aspects, whether it was speed, strength, or even the angle. However, Letitia and Freya barely saw the movements. To them, it was all too fast. The only thing they got to see was a black gale that appeared to float in front of Zen, while his hand reached into the mass of wind and kept swinging. He continued the motion as if he wanted to disperse the strong torrent of wind with his own limbs. As Zen's palm moved faster and faster, the color of the wind gradually became fainter. It slowly turned from an inky black to a darker gray, then it completely disappeared in front of the 2 women's eyes. What they didn't see was that during that entire process, Zen's right hand had crushed thousands of small black snakes. When Zen had extinguished the last of the small black snakes formed from the mighty strength, he took 2 steps back and cupped his hands towards Master Feng. His lips curved up into a small smile. On the other hand, Master Feng looked extremely amazed. He released a deep sigh after a while and said, "The information I comprehended from my bloodline has told me that the Master of the Evolutionary Universe wants me to train the 10 godly geniuses and send them to Divine Refinement Forbidden Land. It is known that only these 10 godly geniuses are qualified to save this round of the universe. Master Feng breathed deeply and continued, although I won't go against the will of the Master of the Universe, I thought that the Master's idea was a bit naive. It would take a while before the young godly geniuses to grow up. How can we fight the sacred race? The purpose of the celestial position was to protect the entire universe from the invaders of the sacred race. It was one of the ways that Mike could protect himself. The real key to his plans lay in Zen and the other 9 godly geniuses. Master Feng naturally understood this, but he also knew that it was simply unrealistic for him to pin all his hopes on the godly geniuses. Therefore, when the sacred race began to attack the entire universe in the last few years, the celestial position had 2 different ideas. More than half of the martial artists wanted to actively prepare for battle, they didn't want to rely on those godly geniuses. Before the godly geniuses entered the divine refinement forbidden land, they were only at the spirit supreme realm. How could the people hope for them to return to the universe and save all living things in 3 short years? Despite the case, there was still a group of people who believed in Master Feng's scheme. After all, it was the plan of the Master of the evolutionary universe, the holy being who had built the universe himself. Of course, his strategies weren't something that ordinary people could understand. Yet while Master Feng had clearly showed his support for the Master of the evolutionary universe, he too was worried. Fortunately, Win stood by his side and helped him to carry out Mike's plan. Not many people sided with him, but all of those who supported him were top-level warriors in the celestial position. Therefore, the celestial position managed to stay put no matter how fast the sacred race occupied the universe. Now, Master Feng finally understood that Mike's scheme was flawless. The others were simply narrow-minded. They never thought about how terrifyingly powerful a holy being was, or how immense his inheritance would be. Master Feng was well aware of these facts now. In fact, he already saw that Zen had undergone a tremendous change after he cultivated in the divine refinement forbidden land. Still, Zen hadn't fully displayed his true strength in the test just now. The said test for the godly geniuses had been arranged before they had returned. This was because the celestial position needed to understand the level of powers, souls, and life vitality of the godly geniuses after their return. Zen had showed his unfathomable strength in the first test. He passed Master Feng's assessment, or it could be said that Zen had beaten him. The gaze of the Master of the evolutionary universe has already fallen to a place that we can't see. Master Feng smiled. Actually, my test was already over. Now it's Supreme Lord Mirage's turn to carry out the test, but I still want to give it a try. Zen was slightly stunned. He did not know what Master Feng wanted to do. Several Supreme Lords were surprised as well, but they didn't say anything. Just then, a golden light flashed from the spot between Master Feng's brows as a mysterious law power emerged from the top of his head. There were 128 heavenly destinies in the universe in total, and all of them usually contained exceedingly strange rules. These rules varied from weak to strong. For instance, Supreme Lord Lester from the celestial position wasn't considered very strong. His combat strength was only equal to that of an ordinary low-rank Supreme Lord. Some of the best Grand World Lords could even hold him to a draw. In terms of combat strength, he was on par with a weak Supreme Lord. However, Supreme Lord Lester was ranked highly among the Supreme Lords. He was ranked just behind 4 other Supreme Lords: Master Feng, Supreme Lord of Original Sin, Supreme Lord of Oracle, and Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment. Such was the case because he carried an extremely powerful heavenly destiny. Supreme Lord Lester could revive any martial artist who was seriously injured, even those who were already dead. This one heavenly destiny of revival controlled the lives of all living beings. It was also because of Supreme Lord Lester that the celestial position had been able to obtain several satisfying crowns of destiny. For example, Master Feng became a top-rank Supreme Lord because Supreme Lord Lester had killed and revived him 13 times. After he had selected a heavenly destiny from all of the heavenly destinies, he had finally obtained the strongest one among all of them in the entire universe, the supreme law of causality. Supreme Lord Sky, take the 2 girls away, Master Feng said. Then, the auras around him began to surge and the entire space was plunged into chaos. It was as if an extremely powerful technique was being brewed. Thus, he had Supreme Lord Sky take the 2 girls behind Zen away, in fear that the auras might affect them. Master Feng, are you planning to? Supreme Lord Mirage's jaw dropped in shock. The fact that they couldn't test the limits of Zen's power made them rather upset. However, it was still a good thing because the stronger Zen was, the more he would be able to help in their future plans. It was just that what Zen had performed could not merely be described strong, but unfathomable. He possessed a power that even Supreme Lords could not describe. It was indeed a bit outrageous. Nevertheless, Master Feng didn't seem too convinced and was determined to find out the limits of Zen's strength. Chapter 1602, Evolution Lotus Flower. Master Feng did not reply. The golden glow between his eyebrows shone brighter and brighter, like a shining star. Master Feng was about to use his heavenly destiny. When the Supreme Lords saw this, they thought it was ridiculous. However, they knew it was useless to try to persuade him otherwise. They had no choice but to stand by and do as he pleased. Whoosh! Supreme Lord Sky appeared behind Zen in a flash. He smiled at Letitia and Freya, and commanded, "Please leave us for the time being." As he uttered those words, a triangular enchanted barrier appeared in his hands, imprisoning Letitia and Freya within it in an instant. Letitia looked at the aura emitting from Master Feng's body and asked worriedly, "Will my husband be fine?" "Don't worry. Master Feng definitely knows how to deal with him," Supreme Lord Sky said with a smile. In fact, even Supreme Lord Sky wasn't so sure. It was originally just a simple test, but he didn't expect it to turn out quite like this. Master Feng had to resort to using his trump card. After Supreme Lord Sky replied, he stretched out his hand and gently tapped on the enchanted barrier. The barrier spun and began to slowly rise towards the sky. The two women were trapped inside the enchanted barrier and watched as they floated further and further away from Zen. In the end, they glided to the top of the breaking cloud mountain. At this distance, they could only see a small gray dot. "Does he really need to send us this far?" Letitia asked with a frown. The reason the Supreme Lord sent them so far away was because he was afraid that they would be affected by the shock waves. What was Master Feng planning to do after he required them to be so far away in order to be safe? Was he going to kill Zen? It would be impossible to do that. Besides, so many Supreme Lords were present. If he wanted to kill Zen, there was no need to worry about Letitia's and Freya's safety. There would be no problem if he killed them all together. Besides Letitia and Freya, the other Supreme Lords also moved away from Zen and Master Feng for the time being, leaving the two of them alone in the hall. "If you are unable to fight me, I will naturally stop." After issuing this warning, Master Feng's body suddenly shook as an even more violent aura was abruptly unleashed from within. And then, a lotus flower suddenly appeared in the sky. All 36 petals of the lotus flower were open as they slowly rotated while descending. This lotus flower has 36 petals. Zen's face had a look of amazement. Normally, a lotus flower appeared when a martial artist was undergoing the heavenly tribulation. At this moment, no one had broken through and reached the new cultivation base. There was no warrior passing through the heavenly tribulation either. So how come a lotus flower appeared suddenly? The godly way my master cultivates is the evolution godly way, and he has already comprehended the supreme secret of the evolution godly way. That is the evolution lotus flower. Master Feng explained, "The heavenly destiny I am carrying is the foundation to construct the universe." When the holy beings formed the stable universe, the process was very complex, and the means involved were also very special. For example, they would build countless great worlds, and after the evolution of these great worlds, they would gradually build the upper world. Then, they would look at the fence between the upper world and the lower world, and construct the ascending passageways between the upper world and the lower world. There were many long ascending passageways from the lower world to the upper world. All of the ascending passageways were constructed by holy beings, and not even a Supreme Lord would be able to construct one. After all the important stuff in the universe had been built, a round of heavens was required to cover the entire universe. That was the greatest comprehension of the world. The various heavenly destinies were all comprehensions of Mike. The most important heavenly destiny was used to seal the entire universe. This heavenly destiny was, of course, a supreme one in the universe. It was also the evolution lotus flower, the profound secret created by Mike after he had mastered the evolution godly way. After sealing the entire universe with the evolution lotus flower, if anyone else wanted to go beyond the heavens, they would have to comprehend the Mahayana lotus flower. That was the only way to gain the qualifications to do so. Back then, Master Feng had been killed 13 times by Supreme Lord Lester and resurrected 13 times, so he had been bestowed with and carried 13 heavenly destinies. 3 of them were remarkable. They would help Master Feng become a mid-rank Supreme Lord at the very least. The 13th heavenly destiny was the weakest. It was the heavenly destiny of teleportation, which could allow one to instantly appear anywhere in the universe. It was not bad as an auxiliary heavenly destiny, but it did not meet the requirements of Master Feng. Gritting his teeth, Master Feng made up his mind to die for the 14th time. After that, he received a new heavenly destiny, the evolution lotus flower. It was considered to be a rule above all the heavenly destinies in the heavens, and also a law of causality. The lotus flower, which was under the control of Master Feng, was slowly approaching Zen. Whoosh! The lotus flower contained a tremendous power. When Supreme Lord Sky and Supreme Lord Mirage saw the lotus flower, they were extremely worried. This evolution lotus flower was the unique technique of Holy Mike. Master Feng was qualified to unleash it because he had inherited this unique technique. How could Zen possibly resist it? Besides, according to Master Feng, Zen had to use his pure strength to fight back, which was proving to be a bit too difficult for him. They also knew that Master Feng was stubborn, and they never expected him to be so headstrong while facing Zen this time. Master Feng had only made one move by using the heavenly destiny since he carried it. At that time, there was an uprising by the celestial position race which had a dispute with the ogre race. Normally, the Supreme Lords would not interfere in a dispute happening in the evolutionary universe. However, 2 Supreme Lords from the ogre race had killed over 10 Spirit Supreme Realm warriors of the celestial position race in this skirmish. At that time, as the celestial position race appeared out of blue, the ogres and other forces didn't take the threat seriously. Master Feng had just become a Supreme Lord at that time, and he didn't have much of a reputation in the universe, so no one feared or respected him as a top-ranked Supreme Lord. In all these years, there had only been a few top-ranked Supreme Lords in the universe. The heavenly destiny was something that could only be attained by luck and not sought. No one ever thought that the celestial position race would use the heavenly destiny of revival to pick this heavenly destiny out for Master Feng. A few days later, Master Feng made his move on behalf of the celestial position. When the lotus flower descended, it came as a shock to all the ogres. He was able to defeat the 2 ogre Supreme Lords with a single move and cause them grave injuries using the evolution lotus flower. Other than that, he had also slayed 19 world lords and 3 grand world lords of the ogre race. The ogres paid a heavy price. Fortunately, Master Feng was merciful so the 2 Supreme Lords of the ogre race didn't die. As for Supreme Lord Matthias and the others from the ogre race, they didn't dare to say anything or take any action during that period of time. After this war, the major forces in the universe started to think highly of the celestial position race. This rapidly rising race was a little mysterious, but the strength that they possessed made the other forces deeply fearful of them. Master Feng naturally did not want to fight with Zen right now. He was being so persistent only because he wanted to see the limits of Zen's strength. After the godly geniuses returned, the celestial position race would certainly make new arrangements regarding their positions. Each godly genius bore great responsibility and would even take part in the god-slaughtering plan. Thus assessment of strength was very important for all of them. Who? That lotus flower slowly descended towards Zen. Zen, the strength that you have displayed is extraordinary. I wonder if you are strong enough to lift this lotus flower. Master Feng smiled. The evolution lotus flower was a kind of Holy Mike's comprehension of the godly way. Just like Holy J's ice soul flame, it was the special skill of a holy being. Master Feng's lotus flower's power was far inferior to the power displayed by Mike, in fact it was hardly comparable to the latter. However, in this universe, such formidable strength was the most sought-after thing for a martial artist. If he kept improving, he would break the rules and cross the heavens. In other words, only a true god would be able to combat Master Feng's evolution lotus flower. The lotus flower continued to hurtle downwards and smashed heavily on Zen's head. A wary expression appeared on Zen's face. He crossed his arms and shielded himself from the lotus flower above him, blocking the bottom part of the flower. Strength. Zen immediately felt the enormous weight of the lotus flower. The load of the great weighty sword was nothing compared to this mass. If the great weighty sword was as heavy as a great world, then this lotus flower was as heavy as 100 great worlds. There was an irresistible force under this back-breaking pressure. Crack! The stone beneath Zen's feet instantly shattered, and his feet sank deep into the ground. Chapter 1603, A Proposal. The people in the universe didn't know much about the heavenly destiny that Master Feng carried as he had never released all of the lotus flower's power in one go before. Judging from the scene in front of them though, it was quite obvious that it contained an incredible power. Under the pressure of the lotus flower, Zen's body was sinking rapidly. However, Zen didn't seem to notice as he remained standing calmly. All the strength he had was activated and, like a raging sea, it coursed through every meridian in his body. All 9 stars in his inner world began to spin faster and faster, its strength source turning into threads and flowing into Zen's meridians. With the help of Holy Drew, Zen had refined his body, causing his strength to increase tremendously. However, even with his current strength, the 9-star strength source was still too much for him. At this stage, 30% was all he could take. Any more than that and his body would collapse. In order to resist the pressure that was steadily descending on him, Zen extracted more of the strength source, making the stars spin even faster. 10%, 20%. Because the strength had rushed quickly into his body, Zen's bones pressed into each other and began to make squeaky sounds. And as the pressure gradually increased, the sounds also turned more violent and were now comparable to that of two mountains sliding against each other. His body, although battered, was strong as steel and iron, its toughness surpassing that of a supreme divine weapon. After what seemed like a lifetime, the lotus flower finally halted its descent. He really managed to hold it. Supreme Lord Mirage whispered in disbelief and astonishment. What kind of power does this kid possess? This is the technique of a holy being. No one below the level of a true god should be able to take it. Supreme Lord Sky was also amazed. Master Feng's eyes gleamed. He pointed 2 fingers and gently pushed them down. Squeak, squeak. The lotus flower that Zen struggled to hold above his head began to press down once again. It's so heavy, Zen exclaimed with gritted teeth. Master Feng's heavenly destiny was truly something else. A lotus flower was actually able to release a weight infinitely heavier than the collapsing mountain race's magic golden stone. Feeling the massive weight press down on him, Zen could only draw out more strength source from his inner world. 30%. 30% of strength source of the 9 stars was his limit right now. When this power gushed out, the meridians in Zen's body coiled around like earthworms. These pathways were as tough as dragon tendons and as thick as a swollen thumb. The sight was frightening. Pop, pop, pop. His bones creaked and joints popped, and the sounds were similar to the chirps of insects. Zen's body seemed to have turned into a musical instrument with all the noise it was making. Rise. With a defiant growl, Zen pushed against the lotus flower and lifted it high above his head. Fa. Supreme Lord Mirage's mouth fell. As did Supreme Lord Sky's. They had lived hundreds of millions of years and they'd never seen anything that shocked them as much as this. It had been countless years since such an expression had appeared on their faces. However, the Supreme Lords around all had this sort of expression. And as for Master Feng, he could only watch in amazement as Zen held the lotus flower. He noticed Zen's body was at its limit. And while it looked like his body would crumble any second, Master Feng knew that this wasn't the limit of his strength. The guy still had some left. But it wasn't much. Okay, that's it, Master Feng conceded, and with a wave of his hand, the lotus flower flew out from Zen's hands. It spun and disappeared into thin air. Master Feng sighed. Today, I was too stubborn, but Zen, your performance was outstanding. You flatter me, Master Feng, Zen smiled. I've already reached my limit. I have to thank you for holding back. I would have failed if you hadn't. Master Feng raised a brow and chuckled. You cunning boy, you're not telling the truth. I'm curious of your limit, but I know when to stop. To be honest, even Zen was not able to identify his limit. He did not know how powerful a third of holy being's strength was when fully released. Moreover, strength aspect was only one aspect of a martial artist's ability. If one were to combine their strength with a certain cultivation method, then the effects would greatly differ. This sort of limit could only be measured in battle. Since Master Feng had finished his test, it was now Supreme Lord Mirage's turn. And he was fully prepared. What he was to test was the power of Zen's soul, and there was no special trick for it. He slowly floated over to Zen and met his eyes. Like a lurking beast watching its prey, the gold fighting soul in his body released a strong pressure all of a sudden. A martial artist's soul was a very important aspect. Strength, life, vitality, soul. When two martial artists fought, all 3 aspects were utilized. For instance, a warrior might first activate their life vitality to attack their opponent at the beginning of a fight, and when they had the chance, they could use their physical strength to engage in close combat. And if they were still unable to finish off their opponent, they could use their soul attack to break the deadlock. However, Supreme Lord Mirage's test only lasted a few seconds. As the majestic soul pressure he released came at Zen, Zen's eyes glistened with golden light and he easily resisted Supreme Lord Mirage's soul pressure. Swoosh! The soul pressure vanished without a trace. When this happened, Supreme Lord Mirage didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Zen, you already have a gold fighting soul. Zen nodded. There was no need to deny it, anyway. Then, there's no need to test. Supreme Lord Mirage shrugged. He wasn't as stubborn as Master Feng. As for life vitality, the celestial position already knew about Zen's background. The cultivation method he practiced was special and far beyond that of the ordinary warriors. There was no need to test it. Today's test had finally come to an end. The test for godly geniuses was actually short. It was just Zen's performance had been so outstanding that he had caused a commotion. Supreme Lord Sky waved his hands and Letitia and Freya, who were at the mountaintop, returned to Zen's side. At this moment, Supreme Lord Lester, who had remained silent the whole time, spoke up. Since Zen already has such strength, I have a proposal. Supreme Lord Lester had a rather eccentric personality. He was a man of few words, so when he spoke, everyone listened attentively. What proposal? Master Feng asked. Help Zen carry a heavenly destiny. Supreme Lord Lester glanced at Zen and said. Heavenly destiny. Master Feng was slightly surprised. Supreme Lord Lester nodded as a smile appeared on his face. Zen doesn't have a heavenly destiny, but his own strength is enough to match a Supreme Lord's. If he were to have a heavenly destiny, imagine how strong he'd be. This caught several of the Supreme Lords' attention. Since the last time the Humanity Alliance confronted the Sacred Race and lost 3 Supreme Lords, the human race had been at a disadvantage. World Lords weren't of much help to humans in resisting the Sacred Race. The number of Supreme Lords the human race had was far less than that of the Sacred Race. There were 128 Supreme Lords altogether in the evolutionary universe, and human race had around 50, but the only promising ones they had were Master Feng, Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment, Supreme Lord of Oracle, and Supreme Lord of Original Sin, which were all top-ranked human Supreme Lords. But, the number of heavenly destinies in the Murphy universe was far greater than the number in the evolutionary universe. Furthermore, all of the Supreme Lords in the Murphy universe belonged to the Sacred Race, which meant that they still had an overwhelming advantage over the human race. The only human beings that could possibly match up to the Sacred Race were the 4 Supreme Lords. If Zen carried a heavenly destiny and became a Supreme Lord, he would be a great help to the human race. No way, Master Feng immediately rejected. Supreme Lord Lester's face turned serious. Why? Chapter 1604, Leaving Fairy Palace. At that moment, Supreme Lord Lester was not able to think of anything else. All of his awareness was focused on the crisis before him and how they could avert it. Master Feng was sure that Zen played an extremely special and important role in Mike's plan. Zen would never have been restricted to just one part of the universe. Once a martial artist carried a heavenly destiny and became a Supreme Lord, their ability to leave the universe was lost. They were no longer allowed to travel where they pleased. Zen would have lost the capability to go to the Divine Land. But they had no choice. If they wanted to be able to solve the crisis posed by the Sacred Race, it was better for Zen to carry a heavenly destiny and become a Supreme Lord. It was not certain whether Zen could really save the universe. Even if Zen drove back the Sacred Race to the Murphy universe, it would have only solved their current crisis. It didn't mean that Zen would be an all-powerful being that could save them from any predicament. The people in the Hall of Holy Beings of the Divine Land would never let Mike go. Now that Murphy had initiated an attack on the evolutionary universe, other holy beings might see their chance to break through the Sighing Wall and invade the evolutionary universe. It would have been an infinite war. Zen wouldn't have been able to fight off so many holy beings' attacks even if he had 3 heads and 6 arms. Upon hearing Master Feng's words, Supreme Lord Lester fell silent. Burdening Zen with a heavenly destiny wouldn't indeed be the best solution. Once he was given a heavenly destiny, it would leave a mark behind. This mark was deeply engraved in one's soul, and it would never be removed. It also disqualified one from becoming a true god. We'll discuss this matter in the future. Master Feng smiled as he addressed the Supreme Lords. Just as he finished talking, a voice suddenly quipped nearby, I have a suggestion. Master Win, Master Win. When they heard that voice, all the Supreme Lords adopted a respectful stance. Not far away, a figure approached. The old man was dressed in a long, immaculate white robe. His entire body was radiant and spotless, as if dust would be automatically repelled if it as much as brushed his garments. This was the only true god of the celestial position race, Win. When Zen saw Win, he also nodded his head in acknowledgement and bowed in greeting, Master Win. As Zen entered the celestial position race for the first time in the past, he did not know their true intentions. A malicious suspicion even arose in his heart and he had a strong dislike for the celestial position race. However, when he saw Win, another realization made itself known in his mind. This true god Win was Mike's disciple, his father's disciple. If only these other Supreme Lords weren't here in the same room with them, Zen would have really wanted to ask him what kind of person his father was. Zen would have wanted to hear more stories about his father. Zen's memories of his father had gradually faded over time, but it was his father's harsh criticisms and lessons that still lingered in his heart. As one of the holy beings, he had another personality inside his own body. He was a compassionate father who mentored Zen. Now, Zen also had conflicting feelings towards his father. On one hand, Mike was a superior holy being, on the other hand, he was a kind father. Which one of them was real? It was hard for Zen to distinguish clearly between them now. Win looked at Zen understandingly and asked him, "Do you still remember that crown of destiny?" Crown of destiny. Zen immediately nodded his head. How could he forget about the crown of destiny? Back then, this crown of destiny was the reason why Zen was surrounded by many supreme lords in the universe. But he didn't have the qualifications to carry the crown of destiny yet then. The minimum requirement was to become at least a world lord. At that time, Zen's cultivation level was too low. You mean that crown of destiny? Master Feng's eyes immediately lit up in delight. The crown of destiny in Zen's possession was passed on down from the last grand era, which meant that it was the 129th heavenly destiny in the universe. The crown of destiny was still kept safely in Zen's fairy palace. Win nodded, and then said, when the last grand era was eliminated, there was a supreme lord who wanted to escape the annihilation. Just as he was about to die, I saved his life, and also kept his crown of destiny in return. Contrary to popular belief, supreme lords' lifespans were limited. Some supreme lords could live for up to 300 million years, but they still weren't able to resist the passage of time. There would eventually be a day when they succumbed to the erosion caused by aging. Win's purpose in saving that supreme lord was to keep the crown of destiny. And this crown of destiny was meant for Zen. You saved that supreme lord? Zen was dumbfounded. Win nodded. When Zen had first entered the reincarnation plate, he'd also been rather curious about some things. A grand era's cycle was 3.6 billion years. After that, the heavens would collapse and all forms of life would go extinct. From supreme lords to ordinary mortals, not a single living being was able to escape being annihilated. That was the way of the universe. What was so special about this supreme lord that he was able to survive safely by hiding in the reincarnation plate? Livingston also survived together with that supreme lord. However, because Livingston only had a puppet body now, he could no longer be fully considered a living being. He was able to continue his life from the last round of the heavens until now. But that supreme lord still succumbed into the 5 aging processes and died. The round of heavens that the heavenly destiny once belonged to has been destroyed already. That was different from the current round of heavens now. You can carry that crown of destiny and it won't leave a mark on you. Don't worry, it won't affect your ability to cross the heavens in the future, Win said with a faint smile. When they heard this, everyone present including Zen, couldn't help but sigh in amazement. Mike's plan was quite well thought out. He had probably foreseen it all since tens of billions of years ago. The only thing he was wrong about was when Murphy would have attacked the evolutionary universe. The sacred race's invasion had been advanced by nearly 300 years. A few hundred years seemed like a big error, but for a span of tens of billions of years, his speculation was already quite accurate. Zen's interest in the crown of destiny was also renewed. He nodded towards Win with a smile and said, "Then I'll go get that crown of destiny now." After some thought, Zen turned to Master Feng and said, "My friends are still in the fairy palace and they won't be able to adapt to the vitality pressure in the upper world. I wonder if there are any ways to get them used to it." Master Feng nodded and replied, "This won't be too much of a problem. Sky, go help Zen." A short time later, Zen led Supreme Lord Sky to the fairy palace. After they had been waiting at the entrance of the fairy palace for a while, the martial artists of the celestial position race came flying over. The leading martial artist held a small purple gold bottle in his hand. The group of martial artists were puzzled. The contents of this bottle were only for the martial artists from the lower world to adapt to the vitality between heaven and earth. Why would they have to deliver it to Supreme Lord Sky in person? Supreme Lord Sky took the bottle and passed it to Zen. He said, "This bottle is filled with dust-cleaning pills. The warriors themselves should adapt to the difference in the pressure of vitality between heaven and earth. We cannot change their bodies. However, the dust-cleaning pill can neutralize one's surrounding vitality between heaven and earth, and after eating this dust-cleaning pill, they will be able to walk in the upper world for a period of time." "How long will this dust-cleaning pill last?" Zen asked. Supreme Lord Sky smiled and said, "The dust-cleaning pills are high-grade pills. One dust-cleaning pill should last for about 30 years. Zen had thought that it would be enough if this pill could last for a few dozen hours. He was speechless when he heard that it could last for 30 years. The celestial position race was really powerful. He extended his hand to take the bottle of the dust-cleaning pills and stepped into the fairy palace. Jeffrey, Imogen and many people from the Cloud Hall had been waiting for a long time. They had been cooped up in the fairy palace for many years. The environment of the fairy palace was good enough, but to them, it was like a prison. Zen brought out the dust-cleaning pills and distributed them into everyone's hands. After everyone had eaten it, Zen headed out to acquire the crown of destiny. The moment that Zen's hand touched the crown of destiny, the entire heavens suddenly trembled. The supreme lords of the celestial position race were not surprised. They knew that Zen had touched the crown of destiny, but the other supreme lords in the universe all looked up at the sky in surprise, wondering why the heavens were shaking again. Zen had no choice but to endure this kind of shock. There was a connection between the crown of destiny and the heavens. It immediately started to shake once he wasn't paying attention. After he took out the crown of destiny, Zen left the fairy palace with Jeffrey and the others. Jeffrey was bored in the fairy palace. He could only use his talent to decipher the golden Sanskrit. However, he was still an 11-year-old child and was filled with curiosity towards this world. After Zen released them, he was naturally elated. He almost jumped up in excitement as he looked up at the breaking cloud mountain, which was like a giant crystal. Chapter 1605, Travel Around. When he noticed Jeffrey looking so excited, Zen felt rather guilty. It was true, he couldn't be considered a dutiful father, and had never even seriously spent any time with his son. However, in his heart, he had made the decision to take time to travel around with him more. After Zen had handed the crown of destiny over to Win had told him that something had to be done to the crown of destiny and it would take some time. Thus, Master Feng had arranged accommodation for Zen and the others from the Cloud Hall. After dealing with these trivial matters and having everyone settle down, Zen wasn't in a hurry to discuss the next step. Instead, he took Jeffrey and Letitia out for a trip. If a great world is a unit, then a supreme world is 1,000 such units. This supreme world is truly vast and endless. Sitting on Zen's shoulder, Jeffrey let out a cry of surprise in his childish voice. The distant mountains that stretched endlessly were like motionless elephants in a deep sleep, emitting a majestic aura in the heavens and on earth. A single glance at them could make people feel full of power. A supreme world is 1,000 great worlds. Who told you that? Zen asked, puzzled. It's from the book, Jeffrey replied with a smile. The book from the library, you mean? Zen asked. Yes, Jeffrey replied, happily. He then went on to say, the 1,000,000 great worlds are the feet. The 100,000 supreme worlds are the hands. The stars in the skies above are the internal organs. And as the stars revolve, it's like a living being who begins to breathe, forming a style of its own. What's the name of this book, Jeffrey? Although Jeffrey's voice was still young and hadn't begun to change yet, the content of his words was extraordinary. To Zen, it felt as though he was being enlightened. Summary of Constructing the Universe, answered Jeffrey in an honest, straightforward tone. The title wasn't hard to understand. Clearly, this book spoke of what the author had experienced when constructing the universe. Constructing an universe was an extremely complex process, and more had to be done to stabilize it on the boundaries of the divine land. Zen immediately thought that this book had probably been written by his master Bromley, while he was building his own universe. That library was truly a treasure trove. It was a pity that Zen hadn't taken the time to read through all the ancient books within, and it was thus somewhat of a waste for him to have the library at all. Little Jeffrey, on the other hand, who actually enjoyed reading, benefited greatly from the library. As a father, you're too ignorant in front of your son, Letitia said, all while giving a gentle smile. Jeffrey's serious tone when repeating the book's passage made her feel proud. This little guy, who had once given her many headaches, was now beginning to show his true talent and power. Zen chuckled. Losing to his son wasn't a big deal. He, too, was proud of Jeffrey. Half a day later, after passing through the mountain range, the bustling Strongdale city came creeping into view. Zen originally wanted to take Jeffrey to another place to see the magnificent scenery. Jeffrey grabbed Zen's hand though, pointed at the city beyond and said, Dad, I want to go to the city. Sure, Zen said, immediately agreeing to his son's small request. Hence, the couple brought Jeffrey to visit the Strongdale city. There were tens of millions of mortals in the city. The sacred race threatened to fight and kill every day, but the vast majority of people still led their day-to-day lives. They weren't interested in the sounds from the roaring tokens continuously ringing in their ears. They were only concerned with their daily lives. What was more, a large number of them didn't even know about the celestial position's existence. They only knew that this place, where they all lived, was called the Strongdale City, and outside of the Strongdale City was the most remote place of the sky. If one wanted to go there, they would have to go through a transmission channel, and 99% of the mortals had never gone through one in their entire lives. In other words, to them, the city was their entire world. And because their world was small, it was easier for them to be content with what they had. Once Zen and Letitia had successfully concealed their cultivation levels, they slowly walked down the street, hand in hand with Jeffrey. Peddlers, cries could be heard as the fragrance of food burst through the air, pouring into their nostrils. The people selling osmanthus cakes, dumplings, wontons and more were all lined up in a row. Upon seeing the numerous snacks, Jeffrey couldn't help but become extremely excited. The meals he had eaten ever since he was young were personally made by Letitia, and with the help of Imogen, they had gathered various treasures relying on the influence of Cloud Hall in order to make Jeffrey's food. These treasures were definitely capable of helping Jeffrey create a physique that was far superior to that of his peers, but in terms of taste, it wasn't delicious, to say the least. The sight and smell of these snacks made Jeffrey drool. He suddenly felt as though this food was probably the best tasting in the world. "Dad, I want to eat this, and this." Jeffrey's fingers danced over the snacks, his cheeks flushed. To him, these were delicacies and he couldn't control himself anymore. Zen simply nodded his head. "Okay, son, I'll buy them all." "It's not good for your health to eat too many of these grains," Letitia said, rather unwilling to let Jeffrey indulge himself in this way. When warriors cultivated, they would keep their flesh pure. Therefore, after reaching the nature level, they would have to follow a very strict diet. The grains contained too many impurities and they would precipitate into warriors' bodies after being eaten. Naturally, it would have no effect on Letitia and Zen if they ate these impurities, but Jeffrey's cultivation was still low, and he had never gone on a fast yet. It was simple, too many grains were simply not good for him. Seeing Jeffrey pout, Zen waved his hand and smiled. "Such a little amount of impurity won't be a problem, in my opinion. You've worried far too much, Tia. Jeffrey, you can eat as much as you want today." "No way," Letitia said. She might have pampered Jeffrey a lot in the Cloud Hall, but when it came to the food he ate, she was very strict. Zen stood in front of Letitia to prevent her from moving forward, all while at the same time giving a little pat on Jeffrey's butt. Jeffrey made a face at Letitia, and then rushed over to the stands like a gust of wind. Seeing Zen spoil Jeffrey so much, Letitia could do nothing but feel helpless, glaring at her husband with grievance. When it was time to pay the bill, the hawkers quickly extended their hands toward Zen. "Sir, 8 silver coins, please." "Sir, this apricot cake costs a total of 4 silver coins." Quote. Zen was slightly startled as he watched these hawkers reach out their hands, asking him to pay money. Immediately, an embarrassed expression appeared on his face. Where could he find the money? Not only did he not have a single silver coin on him, he didn't have a sliver of gold, either. Gold and silver were the most widespread currencies among mortals. The currencies used by martial artists were life vitality crystals and life vitality jades. The hawkers, now looking at Zen with palms turned upward, also found Zen's expression to be quite strange. Just from Zen's appearance, who had an impressive physique and remarkable temperament, and Letitia's beauty, ordinary mortals could tell at a glance that these were not ordinary people. A mortal would never believe that they could have problems paying such a small sum of money. The hawkers didn't dare say anything, though. They simply waited, hands extended, for Zen to pay the bills. Zen remained dumbfounded. He truly didn't know what he could use to pay for the food. He couldn't just pull out a life vitality jade. A single life vitality jade, in fact, could probably buy over 100 streets of this city. Jeffrey, who was standing to the side, didn't care about such things and was already engrossed in eating. "Tia," Zen could only glance at Letitia for help. Letitia turned her head away with a smile on her face, but didn't respond a single word. "Tia," Zen urged, gently tugging on the corner of her clothes. He was a powerful world lord now, and he wouldn't do such a thing as running away for a few silver coins. This was too shameful. He felt terrible. As Letitia saw her husband in such a predicament, her heart softened. She rolled her eyes before reaching for her space ring. In fact, Letitia didn't usually carry any gold or silver with her either, but she was the kind of woman who always carried plenty of little trinkets along with her. A few of them were made of gold, such as the hairpin she took out from her space ring. She transformed the pin into a number of small golden beads and handed them over to Zen. When Zen saw these gold beads, he let out a sigh of relief. He finally had a way out of this embarrassing situation. However, he didn't expect that when he handed the gold beads to the peddlers, they were all completely overwhelmed. "Sir, this is just way too much. These are pure gold beads, and they are enough to buy my entire shop. Besides, I simply don't have enough change to give you." 8 silver coins is enough, sir. Do you have that amount? Zen immediately felt a headache approach as he heard these words. With a flick of his hand and perfect control of his strength, the gold beads fell into the hawker's pockets. Zen immediately grabbed Jeffrey by the arm and said, "There's no need for change." He left briskly, leaving no trace behind him. Jeffrey tightly grabbed onto the snacks in his hand, completely ignoring the surrounding noises. It was true that this child's greatest ability was to focus. Letitia leisurely followed behind the two of them. Seeing her husband's actions, squirming beneath the embarrassment, she couldn't help but feel amused. As for the peddlers, they all stood, minds blown, completely dumbfounded. Each of them had 4 to 5 gold beads in their pockets, which was equivalent to several years of revenue in their business. It wasn't until the Immortal-like couple had left far, far away that they finally got back to their senses and realized that they had just made a fortune. They were extremely excited. Although they had guessed at the idea that the couple were not mortals, they were now sure of their guesses. This city was after all a city in the upper world, and it wasn't at all impossible to encounter rich warriors here. Chapter 1606. In a dilemma. It didn't take long for Zen to gain quite a distance between him and the peddlers. After Letitia caught up to him, she covered her mouth and giggled at his side. The passers-by on both sides of the street all cast strange gazes in their direction, not knowing what exactly the couple was doing. Only Jeffrey was extremely calm, still utterly focused on eating the snacks in his hands. From this experience though, Zen had definitely learned his lesson. The next time he'd take his son out to have a little fun, he'd at least come prepared with a few silver coins beforehand. Over the next few days, the three of them toured through several cities. Along the way, they'd even met a few warriors with low cultivation levels who cast greedy eyes on the beautiful Letitia, seemingly having evil thoughts about her. Jeffrey stood in front of his mother just in time, and the warriors were all scared away by Zen's aura. Throughout the trip though, Zen had truly enjoyed a rare moment of joy. It was a pity that the universe's current situation was still very dangerous. Otherwise, he'd have been more than willing to take a decade or two of time to accompany Jeffrey. During the past few days, roars from the roaring tokens could often be heard booming throughout the universe. Since the sacred race had invaded the evolutionary universe, they used the roaring tokens to announce their feats every time they occupied a supreme world or killed a world lord. In this way, they suppressed the morale of the people living in this universe. The said voices often rang in the people's ears, which was truly annoying, to say the least. However, the content spoken through the roaring token today was actually aimed directly at Zen. Upon hearing these words, Zen could do nothing but frown immediately. At that time, the clouds condensed with the rolling blood mist above the ultimate immortal city had completely disappeared, and the sky had once again returned to its deep blue color. The originally strong smell of blood had already faded quite a bit, and now, the stench seemed to give off a sweet and refreshing scent instead. After the blood curse array had been destroyed by Zen, tens of millions of mortals were driven out of the ultimate immortal city. To the sacred race, killing these mortals wouldn't bring them any honor. Without the blood curse array playing its role, their reckless slaughter of mortals would only cause them to be tainted with malicious auras. They knew it would be better to leave these mortals run their own course. The said mortals understood that they had just narrowly escaped death and were beginning to migrate to their individual hometowns. As long as they weren't tortured by the sacred martial artists, they were quite resilient and were determined to overcome many difficulties in order to return home. When they passed a hillside that was 100 miles away from the ultimate immortal city, they discovered a huge crater that they had never seen before. It was so huge that if one stood at the edge of the crater, it was almost impossible to see the bottom. Once Zen had snuck into the fairy palace, he used the teleportation token to remove the fairy palace's node and disappeared right before Maha's eyes, causing him to feel enraged. Maha simply couldn't wrap his mind around the idea that Zen had such a miraculous ability. He didn't believe that Zen could stealthily disappear directly in front of two sacred supreme lords. This wasn't an ability that a world lord should possess. Even a supreme lord wouldn't have had the capacities to do that. That was why, after Zen's disappearance, Maha firmly believed that Zen had used some form of concealment technique in order to hide himself underground. "We'll find him, even we have to dig 3 feet under." At the time, Maha shouted his order with confidence. The sacred race had, however, dug much more than just 3 feet into the ground. It was even possible to say that they had dug more than 3,000 feet. The final result was obvious: Zen had miraculously disappeared, just like that. After Zen had returned to the evolutionary universe, he had broken apart the sacred race's blood curse array. At the same time, he had humiliated Maha throughout the entire universe, which had destroyed the sacred race's confidence. After all that, he had escaped safely. To Maha though, this was an unacceptable defeat. Following such occurrence, Maha urgently gathered all of the sacred Supreme Lords in the evolutionary universe and convened an emergency meeting. For their invasion of evolutionary universe, the sacred race didn't send out all of their forces. They only sent 44 Supreme Lords, Maha and a multitude of godly geniuses from the sacred race, as well as tens of thousands of world lords. From the overall situation, it was safe to assume that the sacred race wasn't worried whatsoever. When it came to overall strength, they knew they had the upper hand. With their absolute advantage, occupying the entire evolutionary universe would be a breeze to achieve. In just 3 years, they had already taken up more than 3,000 supreme worlds. Their current speed was already quite fast. According to the sacred race's plan, even if they'd spent 300 years occupying these 3,000 supreme worlds, this still wouldn't be considered slow. Maha was the top godly genius, the leader of the sacred race's expedition force. His strength might not be comparable to that of certain Supreme Lords, but he had the authority to command Supreme Lords. That was why Supreme Lord Noel and Supreme Lord Barry were like his subordinates before Maha. However, not all Supreme Lords were bossed around by him. Maha! Someone shouted his name powerfully. You actually let that human godly genius escape right in front of you. That's a grave dereliction of duty. And you know it. The one speaking was Supreme Lord Denzel. He had the most seniority of all the Supreme Lords throughout the entire sacred race, and he was a top-ranked Supreme Lord. When he heard that Maha had let the human godly genius escape, he simply questioned him right in the face, without showing any mercy. Maha indifferently looked at Supreme Lord Denzel. He didn't refute his words, though. The master of the Murphy universe has urged his disciples to repeatedly emphasize that no one else in the evolutionary universe is important, except for the godly geniuses, and everyone should spare no effort to go all out and kill them. This is your negligence to let that godly genius go, and you should trust that I will send a message back to the Murphy universe. Supreme Lord Denzel said. The master he spoke of was the creator of the Murphy universe, Holy Murphy. In fact, from a racial interest perspective, the sacred race didn't have a strong motive for invading the evolutionary universe at all. The Murphy universe was already so large, it was enough to hold the entire sacred race. More so, there were still many supreme worlds within the Murphy universe that the sacred race had never occupied or even explored before. Taking over the evolutionary universe wouldn't do the sacred race any good. The sacred race was ultimately created by Murphy though, and Murphy was the father of their race. He wanted the sacred race to break the sighing wall and take over the evolutionary universe. There was simply no reason for the sacred race to refuse. Before the sighing wall was opened, Murphy had sent a message through his disciples, saying that his primary goal was to occupy the entire evolutionary universe while his another goal was to kill all the godly geniuses. If he could occupy the evolutionary universe, he knew he could kill Mike. By killing the godly geniuses, he'd be capable of severing any remaining hope that Mike might be able to make his own comeback. This was a common game between holy beings. As for the sacred race, they didn't really comprehend what was going on. They didn't need to, either. Maha just shrugged his shoulders and rose from his seat in a single motion. He sauntered to the front of Supreme Lord Denzel, and the sneer on his face became even more intense. That day, you weren't too far away from the 7 ultimate world. Seeing as you've called me negligent for letting Zen get away, then tell me, why didn't you personally make a move to catch him? As Maha spoke, he let his tone blame everything on Supreme Lord Denzel. How could Supreme Lord Denzel not recognize the meaning behind his words? Just as he was about to refute Maha, both Supreme Lord Noel and Supreme Lord Barry spoke up at the same time instead. That kid's treasure is definitely extraordinary. Even if we tried our very best, we still wouldn't be able to break that fairy palace. The fairy palace must be a treasure from the divine land. Supreme Lord Denzel, it's easy for you to say that. But even if you had been there that day, I'm afraid you still wouldn't have been able to do anything. With both Supreme Lords supporting him, Maha once again shrugged his shoulders. Of course he knew that he couldn't do anything. That's why he didn't step out that day. Maha laughed obnoxiously. But now, you actually want to report this to the master of the Murphy universe. Supreme Lord Denzel, your heavenly destiny is very strong, but your trickery seems to be even more powerful. Maha, Supreme Lord Noel and Supreme Lord Barry had obviously colluded with each other beforehand. As the three of them echoed with one another, together they muddied the waters and shirked a portion of the responsibilities onto Supreme Lord Denzel's shoulders. Supreme Lord Denzel, on the other hand, had his own thoughts on the situation, of course. He was one of the top 10 Supreme Lords of the sacred race. After the sighing wall had been broken through, he felt as though he should have been named leader of this expedition team and come forth to attack. Never had he ever imagined that the leader position would be given to a child less than 100 years old. It was only natural for him to perceive this as unfair. Sacred race was not as united as it seemed. There were different branches inside the sacred race. Supreme Lord Denzel had long since disliked Maha. It was just that the entire sacred race was controlled by Maha's family, and Maha's father was also the #1 Supreme Lord within the Murphy universe. Though extremely angry, Supreme Lord Denzel could only swallow his fury. He'd finally found an opportunity and decided to report the matter directly to the master of the Murphy universe. The master attached great importance to these 10 godly geniuses of the evolutionary universe. It therefore wasn't a small sin for Maha to have let that godly genius Zen go. But, just as he was about to go ahead and make things difficult for Maha, he was bitten by the boy. Supreme Lord Denzel was taken aback and felt quite depressed. Maha indifferently stared at Supreme Lord Denzel, as if he didn't take him seriously at all. He turned around and his figure flashed as he sat down, looking around at all the Supreme Lords present. He rested his chin on his hand and said, "Everyone, we've gathered here today in order to find a solution, not to argue. In such a situation, what sort of brilliant plan might you have for dealing with this?" It was true that the sacred race had occupied over 3,000 supreme worlds of the Humanity Alliance, but in reality they had also been dragged into a quagmire. If the sacred race wanted to continue expanding toward the supreme worlds of the thoughtless minds, they would have to stabilize the supreme worlds that had already been seized, which was why they used the blood curse array. This blood curse array, though, was very troublesome to employ and was also very expensive. It greatly slowed the speed of the sacred race's expansion. Currently, the 3 great human forces, the celestial position, the ogre race, as well as the small races had all declared war on the sacred race. If the sacred race didn't take any more steps forward, it would greatly affect their morale. Thus, the sacred race found themselves in a dilemma, to say the least. Chapter 1607, Malice of the Universe. A number of Supreme Lords stood on either side of Maha, and all of them remained silent. To be honest, none of the Supreme Lords present was happy with Maha. A Supreme Lord was a superior existence in every which way. They were the people who stood at the peak of this world, the ones who carried the heavenly destiny, and the ones who represented the heavens. Even though Maha was a godly genius and the son of the top Supreme Lord, he was still just a world lord. And the Supreme Lords would not willingly submit to anyone without any absolute strength to suppress them. But because of Maha's status, the Supreme Lords maintained a respectful attitude, even though it was a facade. Now that Maha had encountered a problem and wanted the Supreme Lords to come up with some ideas, they might not necessarily be very cooperative. Maha had originally gathered the Supreme Lords today for a brainstorming session. As he looked at the reluctant Supreme Lords, the smile on his face hardened. "It looks like none of you has anything to worry about at all." Maha sneered. "Didn't you discover anything strange after arriving here?" Most of the Supreme Lords remained silent. Only Supreme Lord Noel spoke up. "Of course we have. This world is filled with malice towards us." Maha nodded. "Yes, malice. The universe was originally an organic whole, like a complete human being. If a person got sick, all bodily functions would be mobilized to fight against the disease. If the human body could beat the disease, then it would naturally heal. If not, the disease would worsen. The evolutionary universe was like a person, and the sacred race had broken through the sighing wall, which was like breaking through its skin. As an alien race, the sacred race had begun to erode the body like a countless number of diseases attacking it. The evolutionary universe didn't even need the command of the holy being to initiate an attack. It was simply a conditioned reflex. The grass, the trees, the rivers, the lakes, the sea, the space, the stars, and countless other living beings and races of the universe maintained a strong enmity towards the sacred race. Even when they simply walked on the grass, they would occasionally stumble over knotted grass. Since the invasion, the sacred race had already encountered 70,000 earthquakes in various supreme worlds. As they proceeded through the supreme worlds of the Humanity Alliance, they encountered over 600 massive beast attacks, over 1,000 insect aggressions, and over 10,000 tsunamis. These were mere statistics, but the true number of disasters might well exceed that. These inexplicable disasters were all aimed at the martial artists of the sacred race. This was the counterattack of the universe. These were minor disasters for the sacred race and didn't cause much damage to these martial artists. But there was another type of disaster. Thunder. In a clear sky. 3 months ago, a bolt of lightning had suddenly struck from within the Three Purities world. Ordinary thunder wouldn't have bothered anyone as much. But the blood-red thunder contained the 9th layer of thunder law, with a power that was extremely terrifying. Even a Supreme Lord would be forced to retreat if they encountered such a massive lightning bolt. This single bolt of lightning had killed over 10,000 sacred martial artists, including 4 Grand World Lords and 17 World Lords. Or, for example, space windstorms. The spatial tunnels built by the humans were highly stable. There might be no space windstorms for thousands of years. Even if there was one, it wouldn't be on that big of a scale. But when it was time for the sacred race to pass through the spatial tunnels, massive space windstorms had already erupted 76 times, taking away a number of sacred armies. 20 world lords had died in the space windstorms, including a Grand World Lord. There were also falling stars, and the gold-cutting gales. All of this malicious intent from the evolutionary universe was nearly impossible to guard against. This caused great headaches to the sacred race. The stronger the power in this universe, the stronger the revenge. Why would I want to snatch so many roaring tokens away and roar in this evolutionary universe? Maha's eyes shone brilliantly, 2 flames of fire rising within his pupils. That's because if we destroy the morale of this universe, its power will weaken. The malice that came from the evolutionary universe had truly lessened a while ago. It was just as Maha had said, this was all thanks to him. We understand what you have to say. And we're doing the same thing. If it weren't for us, would those old fellows from the human race have let you get rid of them so casually? Denzel snorted. The morale that you personally destroyed has been motivated by Zen. Maha's expression didn't change. This universe was built by a holy being. Of course, it couldn't be easily destroyed. That's why I have gathered you all here today, hoping that you would come up with some ideas. Our top godly genius is extraordinarily wise. I believe you already have a plan. Why bother asking us old fellows? Supreme Lord Irvin said, his tone strange. The Supreme Lords of the sacred race were divided into 3 groups. Among the 3 groups, the Supreme Lords led by Denzel hated Maha the most. Supreme Lord Irvin was one of them. One of the groups remained neutral. This group of Supreme Lords didn't like Maha either. But what happened on the grander scale was more important to them, which was why they weren't as hostile towards Maha. The 3rd group, including Supreme Lord Noel and Supreme Lord Barry, followed Maha, hanging on to his every word. At Supreme Lord Irvin's words, Maha's eyes flashed. He sighed and said, Supreme Lord Irvin, it seems that you still don't know what cards the humans have. What do they have? Supreme Lord Irvin said disdainfully. The group that Supreme Lord Denzel and Supreme Lord Irvin belonged to had always valued strength and were proud of theirs. They had always been disdainful towards the human Supreme Lords. The only one they were afraid of was perhaps Win, the true god behind the celestial position race. The heavenly destiny that the old leader of the celestial position race has taken on is the evolution lotus flower that Mike has comprehended. This lotus flower can use the power of the universe. Maha stared at Supreme Lord Irvin, his smile getting colder by the second. I don't know just how powerful this universe is, but if you guys ever meet this old man, you must be very, very careful. The Supreme Lords, faces darkened at this. As Supreme Lords, they understood that there were different levels of destinies. Some heavenly destinies were excessively strong, while others were pitifully weak. They were divided into the upper, middle, and lower ranks of Supreme Lords. The lotus flower in the evolutionary universe and the spinulose wood fern in the Murphy universe were both called heaven's suppressing object by the sacred race and were used to suppress the heavens. It was the strongest heavenly destiny of the heavens. Maha's father owned this heavenly destiny in the Murphy universe where the sacred race came from. Where did you get that information from, godly genius? A Supreme Lord of the sacred race asked. That is not important. What is important is your attitudes. If we were to fight those Supreme Lords, you guys would be the ones to rush to their deaths. Not me, Maha sneered. But when it does happen, how can you bear to stay out of it? Supreme Lord Denzel countered coldly. Oh, the smile on Maha's face widened. It would be a pity if my body were to perish, of course. But my father has prepared another body for me, made of a holy fruit of the spinulose wood fern. So I don't care if I die or not in the evolutionary universe. On the other hand, if you guys were to die. Heh. Maha had already made preparations. He had a way out even if he died. His father was controlling the spinulose wood fern. He had also taken a holy fruit from the tree and turned it into another body for Maha, which was even better than the previous one. As Maha spoke, a silence descended on the Supreme Lords once again. But this silence was different. Previously, they hadn't wanted to cooperate with Maha, but now, they were pondering the situation they were about to face. After 5 minutes of silence, Maha leaned back against his chair. In his hand was a small golden scimitar. Maha's fingers gently caressed the edge of the exquisite-looking scimitar. He narrowed his eyes and swept his gaze across the crowd of Supreme Lords, an arrogant smile appearing on his face. He hadn't had any regard for these Supreme Lords from the very beginning. After a long while, Supreme Lord Palmyr, who had been neutral so far, finally spoke up. If we want to destroy their momentum, we must first give the humans a painful beating. I actually hope to start an all-out war with the human race, but I'm afraid those old foxes aren't so stupid, Maha said, shaking his head. Chapter 1608, A Child's Voice. In regards to the overall situation, the sacred race were the ones who had the advantage. However, the human race still had a praiseworthy strategy. Even against the odds, they were able to devise such an intelligent scheme. After they sacrificed the territory of the Humanity Alliance, the sacred race was stuck in a quagmire. The warriors of the sacred race were unable to move any further into the universe. They continued to linger at the Supreme Worlds, which were on the border between the Humanity Alliance and the Thoughtless Minds. Whenever the sacred race wanted to continue their expansion, the Thoughtless Minds and the Blessed Buddha Land disrupted their advance. The two groups dispatched hundreds of world lords to attack the Supreme Worlds occupied by the sacred race. The most important thing in their strategy was that there seemed to be a Supreme Lord among the human race, who carried the heavenly destiny of a space theurgy. The heavenly destiny could send any martial artist into any Supreme World. Additionally, the martial artist would usually appear and disappear mysteriously to make sure the enemies wouldn't be able to detect them. As such, the sacred race would often be bewildered with mysterious events. For example, as soon as the sacred race occupied two Supreme Worlds, several World Lords were sent to guard them. However, those World Lords were always slaughtered suddenly just after the Supreme Lords of the sacred race left. In truth, the Supreme Lord who held the heavenly destiny was Supreme Lord Helm of the Humanity Alliance. The heavenly destiny that he carried belonged to the Space Law. Additionally, the heavenly destiny he held contained the theurgy known as the Space Lock. The martial artist connected to the Space Lock could be thrown to any corner in the universe by Supreme Lord Helm. He could even instantly pull that martial artist back to his side. After the Humanity Alliance was defeated by the sacred race and retreated to the Thoughtless Minds, Supreme Lord Helm continued to employ the Space Lock. He cooperated with some of the stronger warriors of the Humanity Alliance, such as Yolanda and the others, to launch surprise attacks. Their guerrilla tactics were more than an effective disruption for the warriors of the sacred race. When the Supreme Lords of the sacred race received the news and rushed back, Yolanda and the rest had already disappeared without any trace. It was that simple tactic that disrupted the attack plan of the sacred race. The existence of the heavenly destiny in the Humanity Alliance continued to be an obstacle for the sacred race. If the sacred race wanted to advance towards the depths of the universe and attack more Supreme Worlds, then the sacred martial artists left behind would all be defeated. They are indeed not that stupid. The human Supreme Lords are just acting in coordination with Zen, Supreme Lord Palmyr uttered. His expression was calm yet calculative. But their strategy is still successful, Supreme Lord Denzel interjected. Right now, the momentum of the entire evolutionary universe has increased by quite a bit. Supreme Lord Palmyr suddenly smiled. I feel like all of you are overthinking. They don't want to fight us head-on, which means that we will always have the initiative. We only need to destroy their momentum. After they saw Supreme Lord Palmyr's confident expression, all of the other Supreme Lords of the sacred race and Maha revealed a trace of interest on their faces. It seemed as if Supreme Lord Palmyr was about to reveal an intelligent counter-strategy. There is such a thing called Roaring Token within the universe. We can use it to issue a challenge to the human race for a fight in a Supreme World. Supreme Lords do not even need to take action. With Maha as the leader, we can constantly fight with the human world lords, Zen and the other godly geniuses. Supreme Lord Palmyr said calmly. A devious smile was seen on his lips. However, halfway through his speech, he discovered the strange gazes from Maha and the others. Thus, he asked them with a curious tone, "What's wrong?" Maha gently turned the golden scimitar in his hand. His eyes were full of caution. Do you think they would fall for such a simple trick? The other Supreme Lords also revealed looks of disbelief. Supreme Lord Irvin said in a strange tone, "Those godly geniuses have returned to the universe. They would surely hide at this moment. Why would they dare to reveal themselves now?" After Supreme Lord Palmyr heard the remarks, he calmly responded. First, the location of the battle would be in a supreme world situated at the border of the thoughtless minds to show fairness. Second, if they didn't accept the challenge under the invitation of Maha, the enemy would only be labeled as cowards. This would suppress their morale and thus weaken the momentum of the universe. Supreme Lord Palmyr's idea might have sounded simple to the others, but he had reasons to believe that it would work against the human race. The human race were the ones who had declared war. Additionally, Zen had issued the war declaration throughout the entire universe. If they would not dare to accept the challenge, it would only show that the human race didn't dare fight with the sacred race at all. It would brand them as cowards. If such a thing happened, it would be detrimental to the morale of the human race. Moreover, they possessed the roaring token of the evolutionary universe. With that treasure, all the creatures in the universe would hear the declaration of challenge from the sacred race. If the human race would reject the challenge, everyone would know their cowardice. As such, the morale of the human race would be instantly destroyed. After we declare our challenge, they will have to take it. But no matter what method the human race choose, the final result will be a crushing defeat for them. Maha, what do you think? Supreme Lord Palmyr said with a shrewd smile. Pa. Maha slapped the golden scimitar's side with his strong palm. Then, with a smile on his face, he said, Supreme Lord Palmyr's suggestion is truly great. Even though Supreme Lord Palmyr heard Maha's praise, he didn't seem happy at all. He remained neutral and didn't care about Maha's complimentary words. Decisiveness was one of Maha's characteristics. He casually patted his waist, and then a roaring token appeared and floated in front of him. After it was activated, Maha's voice loudly echoed throughout the entire universe. At the same time, Zen traveled in the breaking cloud world along with Jeffrey and Letitia. The three of them were focused on their plans when they became alerted by an unexpected sound. Maha's voice suddenly vibrated through the air, accompanied by his wild laughter. Zen and the others could clearly hear his maniacal voice. Zen, you talked nonsense a few days ago. Aren't you going to represent the human race to attack our sacred race? Don't think that I have forgotten your idle threat. Now, on behalf of the sacred race, I'll give you a fair chance. I will be waiting for you in the sunflower water world. I'll look forward to crushing you. After he was reprimanded by Zen, Maha did not make any move for several days. But with Supreme Lord Palmyr's strategy, Maha's voice once again reverberated throughout the entire universe. What? Maha dares to challenge Zen? Maha has the cultivation base of a world lord. Additionally, he also had once killed several grand world lords. That guy's strength is far greater than that of an ordinary world lord. When Zen was in the illusion battlefield 4 years ago, he was only at the Spirit Supreme realm. This challenge is unfair. I'm afraid Zen won't accept the challenge. He is at a total disadvantage. The sunflower water world is supreme world of the thoughtless minds. Maha is quite bold to choose that place. I wonder if Zen dares to accept the challenge. The discussions echoed throughout the universe. Everyone immediately noticed how disadvantageous the fight would be for Zen. As the discussions continued, the momentum of the entire universe would fluctuate. This momentum could neither be seen nor touched, but it really existed. With careful consideration, Maha's simple yet diabolical provocation was clearly a scheme. Any intelligent creature would immediately realize that the sacred race just wanted to set up a trap. No wise warrior would take up the challenge. However, there would always be someone who wished for a true hero to emerge from the evolutionary universe. That hero was believed to unite the universe and defeat the sacred race. After Zen issued his war declaration through the roaring token some time ago, many creatures placed their hopes on him. A lot of them hoped that he would accept the challenge. If Zen tried to decline, he would inevitably leave the impression that he was someone who would talk but would not do what he said. Maha tossed the roaring token on the ground and continued to fiddle with the golden scimitar. A devious smile painted his face. He had already made his move. All that was left to do was to await Zen's response. However, Maha was startled when a child's voice echoed throughout the universe. He waited for Zen's response, and yet, a child suddenly spoke to him. Maha, how old are you? All the living creatures were stunned when they heard the child's voice. Bewilderment enveloped them as they couldn't figure out who or what the sound was from. As for Maha and the other supreme lords of the sacred race, they were also stunned. They were confused about how a child's voice suddenly vibrated to their ears. Although it was strange, Maha was alert and did not reply with the roaring token. He decided to observe the situation first. Maha, how old are you? You can't even tell me your own age. How can you be so boastful to issue such a challenge? You're the #1 godly genius of the sacred race. However, it seems that you're too cowardly to even respond to my question. The child's voice continued to mock and provoke Maha. The soft and young voice echoed in the universe and suddenly made countless martial artists and mortals laugh. Where does the child come from? The kid has balls to provoke Maha like that. Ha ha, let's see how Maha will answer. Maha was also extremely confused. Why was the situation completely different from what he had imagined? How come a child suddenly mocked him? Tell me, how old are you? It's not a shameful thing to reveal your age. Why are you so hesitant? Answer me, Maha. The child's voice continued to demand a reply from Maha. When Supreme Lord Denzel, Supreme Lord Irvin and the others saw Maha's hesitant expression, all of them secretly laughed in their hearts. They thought of how hilarious it was that Maha couldn't even respond to a mere child. As for Supreme Lord Palmyr, who came up with the suggestion, he had a strange expression on his face. Confusion enveloped his face as he wandered again in his thoughts. He had considered all sorts of scenarios, but he just hadn't expected that sort of thing. In the end, Maha slapped the golden scimitar onto the ground and activated a roaring token. His face reflected his agitation. I am 92 years old. There was a moment of silence. Then, that child's voice said with a tone full of mockery, you're so old. You are already a 92-year-old man. I am 11 years old, and my father is 33 years old. My father's age plus my age is only 44 years old. Even if you combined our ages, it would still be younger than you. It's simply unfair that you challenged my father to a battle. After all, if my father were to cultivate for 50 more years, he would easily beat you to the ground. Chapter 1609, An Unavoidable Fight. Hearing the words of the child, the people listening in the universe suddenly realized what had happened. The boy was Zen's son. You mongrel, Maha wore an angry look on his face. To mortals, a person who was 92 years old already had one foot in the grave. However, for martial artists, he was still too young. Normally, martial artists would live for thousands, or even tens of thousands of years. Mortals adjudged them to be immortals. Besides, those at the Soul Sea realm, the Spirit Supreme realm, and the Spirit Transformation realm usually lived for millions of years. World Lords could live for tens of millions of years, and Supreme Lords could live for hundreds of millions of years. With such long lifespans, they were witnesses to the passage of time and the births and deaths of races. To the mortals, these were eternal existences. 92 years old. For world lords who had lifespans of tens of millions of years, one at the age of 92 was like a chick pecking through an eggshell. It had just opened its eyes and stuck out its furry head from the broken eggshell to perceive the world around it. In this time, Maha had already trained to the world lord level and had become a genuine godly genius. Undoubtedly, his talent could not be underestimated. Unfortunately, there were people still more powerful than him. In truth, the 10 godly geniuses in the evolutionary universe were much younger than Maha, for the conditions for the birth of godly geniuses were different between the two universes. Right now, Mike was at a critical moment, so he no longer had any qualms. Godly geniuses, including Zen, Roche and Nathan, were the trump cards for his last counterattack. If they failed, they would witness the death of a holy being. Murphy had not gotten so far. Still, he held the upper hand. There was no need for him to invest his resources into godly geniuses. After all, when a godly genius like Maha grew up and went to the divine land, he would only become one of his disciples. Perhaps Maha was not as highly talented as the 10 godly geniuses in the universe, but he was still the son of the #1 Supreme Lord of the sacred race. In addition, he was several dozen years older than the 10 godly geniuses. With the cultivation of the sacred race, his current strength was truly unmatched. He was only inferior to a Supreme Lord. Jeffrey's answer was childish, but his logic was easy to follow. Since Maha had offered to fight Zen and emphasized the word fair, then he must do so in an absolutely fair manner. But Maha was older than Zen by over 50 years, and based on age alone, the fight would be unfair. When martial artists fought, their ages were not decisive factors in the contest. After all, as they grew up, their circumstances, opportunities, experiences, mentality, and background all exerted important influences. The results were dependent on many components. It was true that the faster they grew, the more outstanding they were. If Zen refused Maha's invitation, he would appear too weak, greatly disappointing the martial artists and the intelligent creatures of the universe. But now, Jeffrey had seen what the problem was. He refused Maha's invitation on behalf of his father. And he was in the right. It was not that his father did not want to fight Maha, but Maha was much older than his father, so the fight was not fair from the outset. Supreme Lord Mirage, one among the celestial position martial artists, was listening to all this attentively before a smile surfaced on his stunned face. Zen's son is very clever. Yeah, the boy is indeed intelligent. It's a pity that Maha is not willing to give up. Master Feng laughed as he shook his head. Because Master Feng was controlling the evolution lotus flower, he was well aware of the momentum that existed in the universe. The momentum could not be seen or touched by others, but he could clearly perceive it as it had been quantified in his evolution lotus flower. Ever since Zen had returned with his war declaration, the momentum in the evolutionary universe had rapidly risen. Therefore, the evolution lotus flower within the heavenly destiny that Master Feng carried had become much stronger. Just now, Maha had challenged Zen to battle via the roaring token. When this news spread throughout the universe, the momentum within the universe began to fluctuate rapidly. The momentum could be understood as the morale and confidence of the living beings in the universe. When the martial artists, mortals, and intelligent creatures fretted and worried, took on a gloomy view, lost their confidence or suffered a nervous breakdown, the momentum declined. When they regained their confidence and united in their hearts with high morale, the momentum increased. Master Feng cared most for Maha's challenge, for the matter directly affected the power of the heavenly destiny that he bore. Zen, I didn't expect you to behave like a coward. You can't even reply directly to my invitation to battle. Instead, you let your 11-year-old son talk to me. What a joke. Maha's voice resounded through the universe. Maha, are you deaf? Don't you understand the words of the 11-year-old boy? With your current strength and status, is it fair to challenge Zen? A metallic voice replied back. Hearing that voice, Zen, who was in the breaking cloud world, was somewhat stunned. He looked Letitia in the eye before saying, "It's Yolanda." Agreed. Zen, a godly genius, has just stepped into the world lord level, but you have been a world lord for so many years. How can that be fair? You're quite shrewd, but also, you're shameless. Quote. Several voices in the universe protested loudly. They were all the famous world lords in the universe. In spite of not having many roaring tokens on hand, they did not hold back in ridiculing Maha. Listening to this admonishment, Maha laughed wildly. Haha, fine. Since you all think it's unfair to challenge Zen, I will go to the Sunflower Water World and await you all. No matter if you are Supreme Lords or World Lords, I challenge you to battle. Would you accept it? I pray you are not gutless cowards. As Master Feng heard this, his face turned stormy. Zen's gaze dimmed, but he quickly regained his calm. Maha's main goal was to suppress the momentum of the universe. No one could stop him. Even if Zen refused, he could challenge martial artists of the other races instead. The words caused the entire universe to sink into silence. They were all witnesses to the strength of this godly genius of the sacred race. During the days when the sacred race first invaded the universe, Maha used to announce each day which world lords of the Humanity Alliance he had killed. He had killed aplenty. There were many world lords in the universe, but who would dare to face Maha head-on? I wonder who in the universe will dare to accept my challenge. Tell me, who dares to fight me? Sure enough, you are a bunch of lowly cowards. Maha continued to use the roaring tokens. With these words of ridicule, the momentum in the universe began to diminish. The mortals and martial artists stared at each other in deathly silence. Sad. This godly genius of the sacred race is too arrogant. Not a single human among us dares to accept his challenge. Godly geniuses are still young, so they won't be willing to get themselves killed. Other than them, are there other talents in the universe? It's because of the difference in strength. Otherwise, even the sacred race would not dare to attack us. Dejection was quick to spread through the universe. However, Maha's provocation only lasted for a short period of time. Among the trillions of creatures of the evolutionary universe, some brave men had faced death unflinchingly. Perhaps they knew that their strength was inferior to Maha's, but they did not cower in the face of his challenge. I, Alexander Zhao of the Spirit Turtle race, accept your challenge. Let's meet in the Sunflower Water World half a month later. A hoarse voice said. The first person to come forward was from the Spirit Turtle, a small race. It was little known in the universe and had never had any Supreme Lords. Alexander was the only Grand World Lord of the race. I, Blair of the Ogre race, accept your challenge. The second was Blair, an Ogre Grand World Lord. The ogres were born with wild natures and could not tolerate Maha's provocation. Although they were still at loggerheads with the Demon Knight race and were badly in need of powerful talents, Blair resolutely chose to accept the challenge. Yolanda from the Humanity Alliance will take your life, Yolanda's cold voice sounded out. And so, as more and more martial artists responded, the momentum in the universe ascended once again. Chapter 16:10. Take a risk. Maha was previously lying on his chair. However, he immediately jumped upon hearing that so many warriors accepted the challenge. Two beautiful female servants walked out from behind his chair and draped a large, silver cloak over him. Maha gave the Supreme Lords a cold smile. I'll be going to the Sunflower Water World soon. Everyone, please prepare well. This was an extremely advantageous outcome for the sacred race. Since the world lords of the evolutionary universe dared to accept the challenge, then Maha would do his best to eliminate all of them. He also did not fear any of the Supreme Lords. The sacred race was not afraid of all-out war. There was also an underlying scheme Maha was brewing by going to the Sunflower Water World. Killing all the powerful warriors also meant destroying the morale of the entire universe, thus, suppressing its momentum. The Supreme Lords of the evolutionary universe making their move was exactly what the sacred race wanted to see. Many of the world lords quickly mobilized towards the Sunflower Water World. Meanwhile, Xenia and Carl, both godly geniuses, also made their return. Nathan and Lucille were rescued by the Humanity Alliance after falling into the fiery rock world and returned to the Thoughtless Minds. Supreme Lord Helm was able to calculate their position. He displayed the space lock to connect to Yolanda, whom he then projected into the fiery rock world. She created quite a ruckus that enabled Supreme Lord Helm to take the two godly geniuses away before the Supreme Lords of the sacred race arrived. The ability to deduce directions by means of the heavens was an extremely useful advantage to the Supreme Lords of the evolutionary universe. This was a consequence the sacred race had to come to terms with by battling in the enemy territory. Several days later, the Supreme Lords of the three great human forces gathered on top of Breaking Cloud Mountain. The Supreme Lords were all wise and naturally understood Maha's motives. They gathered here first to try to figure out how to deal with this situation. Understandably, the atmosphere around them was extremely heavy. It's not the right time. Maha has given us quite a difficult problem. Master Feng, the head of the Celestial Position race, sat on the seat of honor, but there was an evident trace of fatigue on his face. Supreme Lord of Oracle stood in front of Master Feng. She wore a cyan long dress today that perfectly emphasized her perfect figure. She too wore a look of helplessness on her face. If the decisive battle starts earlier, what would be our chances of winning? The eyes of Supreme Lord of Original Sin and Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment flickered as they looked at Master Feng. There was a bit of hesitation before he answered. 20%. Our chance at victory is too small. However, these Supreme Lords had many tricks up their sleeves. The God's killing sword array the Celestial Position had designed and created, for one, simply waited for Margaret to control once she returned. The Thoughtless Minds also had the Star-Destroying Array. The Blessed Buddha Land also had the Grand Buddha Pagoda. Supreme Lord of Oracle also cultivated the self-destruction technique. What was more, Master Feng had the Evolution Lotus Flower that could grant him extreme strength for a short period of time. Such strength could qualify him to injure or even kill a true god. The evolutionary universe's foundation was also quite strong. Mike had already predicted all this and invested everything he had in this grand era. However, despite all these trump cards, their chances of winning remained slim. Whoosh! A ray of light shot out from the sky. That ray of light was a warrior who stopped just 100 miles away from the Breaking Cloud Mountain because it was at this point that an invisible light curtain blocked his way. Supreme Lord Mirage's eyes froze for a moment before he waved his hand and opened a small hole on the curtain, allowing the warrior to enter. The warrior was none other than Zen, who had been summoned to this gathering by the Supreme Lords. Zen quickly landed on the summit and bowed to the Supreme Lords, greeting them with great respect. Supreme Lord of Oracle smiled. Zen, it's been 3 years. I heard your strength has greatly increased. They had already been informed of Zen's performance by Master Feng. This piece of news was probably the only consolation they had been given after things had become dire. It was natural for them to hope for Zen's growth. They all counted on him to slaughter all sacred warriors that had infiltrated their universe. However, despite Zen's growth being worthy of admiration, it was still not enough. You flatter me, he said. Supreme Lord of Original Sin simply glanced at him. There's no need for modesty, Zen. I want to hear your opinion regarding Maha's challenge. Zen's eyebrows rose at his straightforwardness, but he simply gave an equally straightforward answer. Ignore him. What do you mean? Supreme Lord of Original Sin asked with a frown. A smile appeared on Zen's face. Since Maha is willing to waste his time in the Sunflower Water World, then let him. We can do something else. What is it? Supreme Lord of Original Sin asked again, clearly intrigued by Zen's answer. They had all been focused onto the sacred race that they didn't have the time to think of other matters. Let's suppress the demon knight first, Zen declared in a cold voice. His words earned him a lot of curious looks from the Supreme Lords. The demon knight couldn't be underestimated, but given their position of being held back by the ogre race, they didn't think that the race really could contribute much impact to the current situation. However, since it was Zen who mentioned it, then there was probably some logic to it. Since Maha wanted to fight in the Sunflower Water world, then there must be Supreme Lords lurking around. Their goal is to force all of us to accept their challenge. We can take advantage of this opportunity to deal with the Demon Knight and free the ogres from the battle. A faint smile crossed Supreme Lord of Original Sin's features. That is not a good idea. We don't need to fear the Demon Knight. You don't seem to know what Master Feng's heavenly destiny is. He's told me, Zen flatly replied. Then since you've heard about it, you should know that if this momentum is taken away, we will lose something we greatly rely on, Supreme Lord of Original Sin shot back. Determination flashed in Zen's eyes. Even if this momentum is seized, I will help Master Feng take it back. How? Supreme Lord of Oracle asked. If Maha kills our warriors in Sunflower Water world, what would the result be? Zen asked. The morale and the momentum would be greatly reduced, Supreme Lord of Thunder Punishment answered. All Supreme Lords are almighty. During the battle, the side that burns with righteous indignation is bound to win. Even if Maha suppresses the morale of the universe, it will still be useless because as long as there is hope, then our morale will rise again. Zen paused before continuing. Let me bring our warriors hope. I will kill Maha. This strategy, Supreme Lord of Original Sin hesitated for a moment. Zen's idea was a bit risky after all. This is practically a desperate choice. Supreme Lord of Oracle sighed lightly. They would first let the sacred race suppress all living creatures in this universe. In this oppressive environment, the warriors would turn into rebels armed with indignation and desperate courage. It was resistance against the set order of violence and oppression that fueled a warrior's determination. When that happened, all of the trillion creatures would fight for their lives. Once the momentum rebounded, then it would yield a terrifying result. However, if they did commence with this plan, they might have to sacrifice a few world lords who would go against Maha in the Sunflower Water world. Can anyone propose a better choice? Zen asked. The Supreme Lords all stayed silent. It seemed there was no other choice. Procrastination was only equal to suicide in their case. According to Zen's idea, if we take the risk, we can increase the chances of winning by 10%, Master Feng declared. The worry was still evident in the Supreme Lords' faces, but this plan was their only choice. They could only hope that this was also the right one. One could either rely on their strength when faced against a powerful opponent or choose to be cunning and take advantage of the situation to win. If all of you accept my suggestion, then we will have to move fast. Before the sacred race can make their move, we must defeat the Demon Knight. Zen declared with conviction. Chapter 16:11. Burning the Mountain. The Supreme Lords had already conducted 12 negotiations prior to Zen's arrival. They had all come into conflicts with each other at some point in the past, but all past grudges took a backseat in this time of crisis. At this time, even the Humanity Alliance's territories had become a casualty to the war. They had all come to a point where nothing was too big of a sacrifice for the sake of the universe's survival. Unfortunately, all 12 negotiations proved unsuccessful in formulating a feasible plan for their victory. Zen's plan was far from perfect. However, they all supported him because he was a rallying point and had a special status. To pacify Supreme Lord of Oracle and the other members of the Humanity Alliance, Master Feng had no choice but to reveal Zen's real identity along with Mike's intention for the three greatest forces of the human race. Zen's return convinced them even more in the truth of Master Feng's words. He had only left for 3 years, yet his cultivation had improved so much. If Zen could carry the heavenly destiny successfully, then his strength might surpass all of the Supreme Lords. They now fully believed in the godly geniuses' power to turn the tables for them. Most importantly, even if they did not believe in Zen and the celestial position race, the sacred race remained as an unbeatable opponent against the three greatest forces of the human race. There was no other choice other than to put their hopes upon Zen and believe in him. Zen, of course, noticed the Supreme Lords' attitudes, which was why he came up with a plan to gain their support. In a quiet corner of the Breaking Cloud sacred place, several dozen world lords were busy coming and going. After arriving, each one would take the time to open their space rings. From there, they brought out weapons and treasures and plopped them all down onto the ground. Most of the weapons were spiritual, fairy, and sacred weapons. Such practice had lasted for several years. In fact, it had been implemented ever since Zen's first visit to the celestial position race territory. Most of the weapons were still intact and undamaged, and an ordinary warrior would no doubt find just one already extremely valuable and precious. These weapons had been collected from all corners of the universe. After years upon years of accumulation, this pile of weapons and treasures had reached several 100,000 feet high. In the bright sunlight, the mountain of treasure glittered and shone in a multitude of colors. What do you think they're planning to do with all these weapons? Who knows? At least they're not for eating, right? It has been several years since the first weapon was dropped here. Even though they're just a load of abandoned garbage, they should be valuable enough in such a great number. These were just some of the remarks that the warriors of the Breaking Cloud sacred place made when passing by this pile of weapons. Not everyone was qualified enough to know the plans of the higher-ups. However, the celestial position race had already spent a lot of time and effort in obtaining such a large collection of weapons, so they must be planning for something significant. At that moment, multiple beams of light appeared across the sky. Each beam of light was a warrior that emanated an extremely powerful aura. Some people on the ground couldn't help but stop in their tracks and stare. These warriors were the human supreme lords gathering in the Breaking Cloud sacred place. These supreme lords were bold and generous. Since they decided to follow through with Zen's suggestions, then there was no time to waste. Under current circumstances, they needed to carry out their plan as soon as possible while staying at the ready for any sort of unforeseeable changes. Their top priority was to help the 9 genuine dragons in restoring their strength and assist Zen in his destiny. The Supreme Lord stopped and floated near the mountain of weapons. Zen, on the other hand, landed at the very summit, the weapons clanging loudly beneath his feet. Zen, you can start now, Master Feng said above him. Zen nodded. His eyes flashed with determination as a brilliant beam of light suddenly glittered between his brows. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. There was a multitude of sharp whistling sounds as the souls of the 9 genuine dragons flew out from between his brows one by one. The 9 genuine dragons hovered over the mountain of weapons. Their leader, the 5-clawed golden dragon, nodded at Master Feng. Thank you for helping us build our heavenly bodies. You and I serve the same master. We are now both in the same boat. There is no need to thank me for such trivial things, Master Feng replied graciously. The 5-clawed golden dragon nodded and turned his huge head towards Zen. Everything was all set, however, it all depended upon Zen. Another beam of light flashed between Zen's brows and a black flame appeared in the air. With a happy chirp, this black flame circled the air once like a bird before swiftly plunging into the mountain of weapons. Zen stood steadily on the mountaintop surrounded by the 9 genuine dragons. Meanwhile, the Supreme Lords merely floated in the sky and observed. Silence filled the air as everyone watched the black flame disappear in the mountain. A few warriors also watched at the sides, curious as to what was about to happen. Are they really going to eat all of the weapons? One of them asked jokingly. Cut the garbage. These Supreme Lords all have great perception. Stop talking nonsense or you'll get punished, one of his friends admonished. Zen tilted his head toward their direction. He was several 100,000 feet away, yet he could perfectly hear their conversation. It was not by perception but simply his good hearing. After being remodeled by Holy Drew, his body improved a lot. Some of his abilities even went beyond his own expectations. One of them is looking over here. Who is this young man? Is he also a Supreme Lord? The two warriors murmured in astonishment by Zen's gaze. To their pleasant surprise, Zen only gave them a gentle smile. These two were only at the life and death realm. They could barely see the smile on Zen's face, but his air of friendliness calmed them down. 2 hours later, the mountain of weapons lay motionless for a bit. Zen resembled a statue as he also stood still on top. He was sensing the motions of the black flame. It was currently burning through all the weapons inside. The flame was incredibly hot and burned through the stack of treasures effortlessly. It was slow at first, merely melting a portion of the weapons at the bottom of the mountain. However, as time went by, it spread and burned through everything more quickly. The weapons melted and turned into ashes at an increasing rate. After incineration, only the heavenly essence remained. This went on for 4 more hours. With a shattering sound, the entire mountain suddenly started to collapse into the center. The black flame had burned through the bottom of the mountain, and the weapons that had been haphazardly piled together all lost their balance, beginning to collapse one by one. Swish! With the mountain's collapse, the black flame finally made its appearance. It was now a huge fire as compared to the initial small spark it once was. The flame didn't show any sign of stopping anytime soon as it continued blazing higher and higher. As it grew, it also got even fiercer and faster at consuming the treasures. The clanging sound of falling weapons reverberated in the entire place. Everyone watched in awe as the black flames danced upon the once glorious mountain of treasure like vicious, ebony serpents. Even the supreme lords couldn't help but gasp as they watched these divine flames burn. One careless brush against these flames would burn their bodies to ashes. However, Zen remained motionless on top of the mountain. His body remained whole and unyielding despite the ferocity of the flames. The fire went from the bottom to the very top and turned all weapons into heavenly essence that flowed into the ditches built underneath the treasure mountain. It wasn't until another half hour that the mountain finally disappeared. With no more fuel, the fire then began to fizzle out, slowly reducing in size before spiraling happily in the air and returning into the center of Zen's brows. With the consumption of the weapons came the appearance of the 9 huge ditches underneath. These ditches were dug way before the first weapon had been dropped in this place. The most skillful craftsmen of the celestial position race worked very hard for several months to create them. All that hard work translated to all 9 ditches filled to the brim with heavenly essence. With an unhindered view of the ditches, Zen saw how each one was intricately shaped like a dragon. The 9 formed a sort of painting of the genuine dragons. Chapter 16:12. The expansion of the great world's wills. Heavenly essence filled the 9 ditches, shining a beautiful silver in the sunlight. The heavenly body was originally a means of creating a puppet. A puppet made from heavenly essence was nearly immortal. Even if its body was ripped apart, it could repair itself in an instant. But refining the heavenly essence was no easy feat. Obtaining a small amount of heavenly essence with poor purity already required much energy. Although some puppeteers managed to make a puppet with the heavenly body, it was normally of a very small size. For this to work, a soul was needed to be sealed within the puppet. Because of this need, it was usually regarded as an evil kind of martial arts. It was by using the black flame that Zen had managed to refine the heavenly essence from abundant weapons in such a short time without any waste or impurity. Suddenly, Master Feng clapped his hands. In an instant, many snake-shaped textures flashed at the edges of the ditches. These divine textures had been drawn after the ditches were dug out. Strands of red lines appeared from each divine texture and crept into the ditches like a horde of worms. Buzz. Making a series of dull sounds, the strands of lines twisted around the coagulated heavenly essence. From Zen's view in the air, it looked as though 9 red genuine dragons were crouching low on the ground. All rise. Waving his hands and clenching his fists toward the ditches, Master Feng shouted. Immediately, the red lines tied the heavenly bodies tightly together and lifted them up from the ditches, making them float in the air. Each dragon looked as vivid as a living creature. Their tails resembled clouds of fire, layers of scales covered their bodies, and their robust heads raised graphically toward the sky. It was clear that the celestial position race had put a lot of effort into the 9 heavenly bodies, having carved out each of the dragon's details. For instance, the largest one had 5 claws, so naturally, it belonged to the 5-clawed golden dragon. Besides that one, all the other dragon bodies had 4 claws. Such was one of the many differences between the 9 genuine dragons, all of which the celestial position race had detailed in carving the heavenly bodies, down to every characteristic. Some of them had 2 tendrils while others had 8, some dragons had only 2 horns while others had 4. Extending his hands into the air, Master Feng yelled at all of the dragon's souls, "Now is the time." It had been an age that the dragons spent dreaming of regaining their physical bodies. The new bodies built by heavenly essence weren't weaker than their original bodies. In some aspects, they were even more powerful. But one fatal weakness remained: they couldn't be used for cultivation, so the dragons couldn't improve their cultivation levels in these bodies. If they had to live with such bodies in their remaining lives, the only aspect they could improve on in the future was their souls. Nonetheless, they had no choice but to remain in the powerful heavenly bodies. They were undoubtedly their best options. Whoosh, 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 the souls of the 9 genuine dragons spiraled in the air and entered their new bodies one after another. The heavenly bodies were all carved out perfectly, so much that they looked almost identical to the 9 living dragons. Only their eyes differed. Before the bodies were occupied by the souls, the eyes on them were vacant without the might of the genuine dragons. The 5-clawed golden dragon was the first to occupy his new body. After a fierce tremble, the heavenly body began rolling in the air. Soon, a peculiar light flashed in the dragon's eyes. From this light, the powerful aura of the 5-clawed golden dragon was sensed. Such was the aura of a real dragon. Whoosh, the 5-clawed golden dragon twisted his new body and began ascending into the sky. But instead of flying up, he crawled toward it. As his robust claws landed in the air, they gathered up power from the space law and created an invisible wall for him to climb up. As he crawled up into the sky, his claws would flash with a silver light when they landed steadily into air. It wasn't long before he surpassed the supreme lords that were floating in the air. Then, he raised his enormous head and roared deafeningly at the sky. The deafening roar reverberated through the entire breaking cloud world. Even those inside the Supreme World channel at the edge of the Supreme World could hear his roar loud and clear. After the five-clawed golden dragon merged successfully with his heavenly body, the heavenly bodies of the other genuine dragons followed suit and came to life. The cyan dragon, the red dragon, the green dragon. After being occupied by the genuine dragon's souls, the colors of the bodies changed accordingly. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Following the five-clawed golden dragon, they ascended into the sky, raising their heads. Their loud and penetrating roars resounded throughout the sky. Each of the genuine dragons had the strength to face a Supreme Lord. While they were stronger than ordinary Supreme Lords in terms of physical strength and theurgy, they couldn't carry the heavenly destinies. In this universe, only the highest levels of the laws of causality were considered powerful martial arts. Needless to say, the genuine dragon race had some special theurgies to them, equal to the heavenly destinies. Since the genuine dragons had obtained their heavenly bodies successfully, they were to be of great help to the human race. After the five-clawed golden dragon stopped his howls, he twisted his huge body and turned to face Zen. Compared to the great head of the five-clawed golden dragon, Zen was a mere fly. The dragon's eyes were a dozen feet in size, much larger than Zen's entire body. With a soft smile, Zen looked into the dragon's eyes sincerely. The souls of the 9 genuine dragons had been hiding deep within his brain for a long time, ever since the very beginning of his long journey. There had been some disagreements between him and the five-clawed golden dragon, but now Zen felt reluctant to part with their souls. Although they mostly remained silent, they had always given Zen the help and guidance he needed at his most critical moments. We, genuine dragons, were originally Holy Mike's contractual legendary beasts. Since he is now on the brink of death, we must do what we can to help him. You are Holy Mike's son and now, we regard you as our new master. After a legendary beast formed a soul contract with a warrior, they became the latter's contractual beast. A portion of both parties' souls became closely intertwined with each other. Such a contract existed between Mike and the genuine dragons. He had their absolute obedience, allowing no betrayal or resistance. Even though they were willing to accept Zen as their master, they couldn't become his official contractual beasts. With a nod, he gave the five-clawed golden dragon a smile and said, I believe we can overcome this crisis. Believe in my luck and that of my father as well. Although the havoc raised by the sacred race could have been the end of the Supreme Lords in the universe, it was a new starting point for Zen. He was well aware that all these things had originated from the Divine Land. In order to change the fate of the universe, he would have to someday enter the Divine Land. After gaining their new bodies, the dragons had to hide themselves in the breaking cloud sacred place. One other disadvantage of the heavenly bodies was their inability to transform themselves into humans. It was all they could do to hide their huge bodies in the mountains. After helping the dragons obtain their new bodies, Zen began planning the war against the demon knight race. Still, there was something he had to figure out. In his mansion at the breaking cloud sacred place, Zen found a rock to sit quietly on. Shutting his eyes, he scanned certain memories in his mind. In the past, these memories recorded only the information of a great world. 4 years ago, these memories had expanded 1,000,000 times for the sake of the sorcerer race. This was because Zen had fused with the wills of 1,000,000 great worlds. 3 years ago, these wills had extended through the ascending passageways and spread across the supreme worlds. Steadily and quickly, they had covered many parts of the universe, but Zen still had yet to scan through their memories after returning from the divine refinement Forbidden Land. Now, he was taken aback by what he found out through these memories. The wills of the 1,000,000 great worlds had covered over 6,000 supreme worlds in the upper world. This included all the supreme worlds belonging to the ogres and the demon knight race. Theoretically, Zen could obtain all information about the demon knight race in the past years, including pieces from Lavender's birth up until her coronation as the queen. The entire demon knight race no longer held any secrets from Zen. He needed to pick out important details that were favorable for his next plans. Chapter 16:13, Taking Action. A portion of the news regarding the demon knight race and the ogres had already reached Zen through the celestial position race. Although the 3 great human forces weren't participating, they still paid considerable attention to the war between the races. Never had the 2 races been in harmony since the remote ages. Their supreme worlds intersected and for many years, there had never been a lack of warfare, including the full-fledged battles. 3 great battles were recorded in history, namely, Battle of the Setting Sun, Battle of Slaughtering the Ogres, and the Bloody Battle of the Illusory Spirit World. In these great battles, the Ogre and Demon Knight races had sent out hundreds of millions of people to battle, where several Supreme Lords had fallen to death. The Battle of Slaughtering the Ogres involved the joint attack of the Demon Knight race and the Humanity Alliance on the Ogres, the latter sustained great losses. According to history, the Ogres normally played less than brilliant roles. The reckless, brutal, aggressive race wasn't welcomed in the universe, whether large or small the force, all were wary of the Ogres. But this time, facing the sacred race's invasion, the Ogres had a sudden burst of courage and uprightness, wanting to resist the sacred race even to death. It was a rather rare occasion for them to play a positive role. As it turned out, the Demon Knight race suddenly declared war on the humans before joining the sacred race. According to Holy Drew's conjecture, the Demon Knight race was created by Murphy to be his hidden palms in the evolutionary universe. Does this mean that the Ogre race was created by my father as a precaution? As he continued searching for information, Zen thought long and hard about the situation. Looking at the big picture, the possibility was quite high. Creating a race was an easy feat for holy beings. Zen just couldn't wrap his head around why Mike would create the cruel and infuriating race of the Ogres. In the current state of things, the Demon Knight race had completely given up on their territory. Their 2 queens had led the elite and rushed towards the center of the universe. But if the Demon Knight race wanted to enter the Thoughtless Minds territory, they first had to pass through the Ogres territory. Otherwise, they could join the sacred race and enter the Thoughtless Minds through the Dark World. Unfortunately for them, the Ogres easily discovered this route as well. They then set up layers of defenses in the 2 worlds adjacent to the Dark World. After a few routes were blocked, the Demon Knight race's advance was forcibly dragged down. But during this process, the Ogres had paid a considerable price. Now, the entire race was also out while all the elites were placed in the bloody evil world, blocking Shania's team. At the time, the Queen of Punishment was leading another team, planning to join forces with Shania. Such was the sign of an oncoming fierce battle. After Zen got a hold of the situation, he continued obtaining information from the world's will. Although he held deep feelings for the Demon Knight race, this time, he was afraid that once he launched his attacks, they would sever their friendship. Back then, he had also made promises to both Amber and Haley which in this situation, Zen didn't know how to fulfill. With his eyes shut, Zen continued circulating the tremendous amount of information within the world's will. To understand the root cause, he used all his strength to collect memories about Elena. The pictures flickered in Zen's mind. He saw the birth of an ordinary baby girl of the Demon Knight race. She was Elena. Her bloodline had the entire race shocked. She was of extremely pure blood of the ancient Demon Knight race, qualifying her for the throne. Scenes of Elena's life concentrated into dynamic pictures, each of which was drilled into Zen's very soul. In the end, a scene from 2 years ago appeared. At that very moment, Elena's soul-sealing needle had awoken. Zen was in the divine refinement forbidden land, accepting the refinement of Holy Drew, while Lavender used her great willpower to erase the needle along with all her other memories. Soon, Zen saw the scene of Elena gathering the members of the Demon Knight race. He saw their incredulous expressions and the strong resistance they held against Elena. Even the Supreme Lords of the Demon Knight didn't seem to approve of her decisions. "Oh, I see," Zen murmured as the realization came over him. Just as what Holy Drew had said, the making of the soul-sealing needles was an extremely complicated process. Even Murphy, who was a holy being, couldn't seal the needles into too many people. For generations, that soul-sealing needle had only been passed down the souls of the queens of the Demon Knight race. In the end, it was activated in Elena and Latonia's generation. So this declaration of war against the human race and joining the sacred race were entirely under the 2 queens' orders. The other people of the Demon Knight weren't affected by the soul-sealing needle. It was known that the Demon Knight race's members regarded themselves as a part of their own universe. While they originally hated the sacred race, they had no choice but to obey the Queen's orders. If that's the case, we only need to kill Elena and Shania. Zen's eyes turned cold as he took out the teleportation token. Although the Supreme Lords might have had some misgivings towards the Demon Knight race, they were willing to pool their strength against the sacred race. When Zen returned, he hadn't displayed his full strength. Now was the time to do so, and the Demon Knight race was to be Zen's first target. In one world of the Demon Knight race was a place called Prison Island. One by one, cyan soldering iron pillars rose up from the ground like huge chimneys. In the air above the prison island, a brilliant light suddenly shone. It wasn't lighting, It was the space law storm. The instant the storm was released, a figure shot out from within. In Prison Island were kept the most important prisoners of the Demon Knight race. Most of them were people who had been imprisoned under the orders of the Queen of Punishment herself. None were nameless. It was to be expected that the guards of the prison were especially strong. In the past, Prison Island had 12 world lords of the Demon Knight race guarding it in turns. But with Elena and Shania having convened nearly all the powerful warriors of the Demon Knight race, there were only 2 world lords left to guard the prisoners. On the tallest observation platform of the island, Fanny, a world lord of the Demon Knight race, carried a longbow as tall as her on her back as she looked at the blazing white storm in the sky. Her eyes turned a pale yellow and she began seeing 3 red dots circling the sky. The 3 dots eventually converged into one and locked onto the figure rapidly descending from the sky. Intruder. A human warrior. Go to perdition. Even the warriors of the Demon Knight race would be killed if they approached the prison island so casually, let alone a human intruder. Fanny didn't hesitate as she gently waved her slender arms. In an instant, the longbow was already drawn and an azure spiral began condensing on the bowstring. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Under the convergence of the spiral, a fluctuation of energy appeared that could cause one's heart to palpitate. Whoosh. The spiral left a 10,000-foot-long trail in the air as it shot towards the figure in a fierce and precise speed. Though her opponent was a world lord, he couldn't dodge her arrow. Fanny was rather confident in her archery skills. The longbow in her hand was a first-rank divine weapon, gifted to her by the island's master before leaving. The spiral grew closer and closer until it finally hit the target accurately before exploding. The turbulence created a violent storm, completely annihilating the target. Is he dead? Fanny murmured to herself as she stared at the sky. When the storm dissipated, she saw a figure descend, or perhaps the figure was falling. He should be dead already. The human world lord can't even withstand a single blow. How weak, Fanny thought. Hefting her longbow, she jumped into the air like an agile rabbit. Then, she flew nimbly through the air, heading straight for her target. Just as her target fell to the ground, Fanny arrived at his side. But at the sight of the target, her expression turned incredulous. The human world lord was lying in a large hole he had caused, slowly climbing to his feet. Then, he raised his head to give Fanny a smile. The man was completely unharmed. A chill ran down her spine as Fanny saw the scene. Immediately, she raised her hand and shot out an arrow. Condensing an arrow, drawing the bow, aiming at the target, shooting the arrow, such movements had already become instinctual to Fanny. With all this happening in a single breath, there was simply no time for the opponent to even react. Crash! The huge pit before them had burst out another storm and expanded to over twice its original size. When the storm dissipated, the figure of the human who had just fallen into the pit appeared once again. All the while, he wore a faint smile on his face, completely unharmed. Chapter 16:14. Looking for someone. The scene in front of the Demon Knight World Lord was certainly something that she did not expect. This strange human youth survived, but he didn't use any theurgy at all. He did not use the protective life vitality nor other skills to protect him. She had successfully hit him with her arrow within a distance of less than 100 feet. Yet there he was, perfectly undamaged. The man who was supposed to have died in the huge pit was alive. Was he a human or a monster? He slowly rose from the huge pit and walked forward. Fanny didn't feel any killing intent from him. What she didn't know was Zen didn't actually want to engage in a senseless massacre. Even if Murphy had created the Demon Knight race, they all grew up together in the same universe and became one with it. They were a part of the universe literally and figuratively. Now, the key to the Demon Knight race lay in the soul-sealing needles buried deep in the 3 queens' souls. Zen wouldn't think twice about killing his opponent if they happened to be a sacred world lord. However, he wouldn't take action if they were a member of the Demon Knight race. Don't attack again, I mean no harm, Zen said as he walked towards the woman. Fanny kept a tight grip on her longbow. Her body was as tense as a tightly drawn bowstring as her feet shuffled on the ground. Her movements were a unique footwork of the archers. She constantly moved backwards as Zen moved forward, careful to maintain a distance of about 100 feet from him. However, she did not fire a third arrow. If the first 2 arrows couldn't damage this young man, could the third arrow kill him? At that point, she was quite at a loss. She had already identified Zen as an enemy, which meant she had to attack him with all her strength. Yet, she didn't feel any hostility from him, which she also found strange. Those who trespass on Prison Island will die. What's your purpose? Fanny demanded and remained vigilant. I'm looking for someone, Zen replied as he walked. All the prisoners on Prison Island are here by the Queen's orders. There's no one you're looking for. Stop, Fanny shouted. Even if she threatened him with warnings and her weapon, Zen didn't seem bothered. He simply continued to walk at an even pace. Just then, Fanny suddenly heard a life vitality message. "Let's attack together and kill him," said the voice. Apparently, the one who had spoken was the other world lord of the demon knight race on the prison island, Sammy. Sammy was slightly stronger compared to Fanny. Perhaps they might have a chance against Zen if they worked together. Fanny was also a decisive person. She immediately acted once she had made a final decision. Dust was swept off the ground as her speed was suddenly increased by several times. She moved backwards as the two ends of her longbow expanded, where 6 black blades appeared. The longbow looked like it had unfurled its wings as a ray of light illuminated its surface. Hiss! Her fingertip glowed a golden light, then it turned into a short golden arrow. The golden arrow made a slight clicking noise before golden wind blades appeared and encircled it. Perfection Storm Arrow. Thanks to her comprehension of the profound mysteries of the 9th layer of the wind law, she was able to perfectly fuse them into her archery. Woo, woo, woo. The golden wind blades spun around the golden arrow like a turbine and emitted a sound that resembled the howling of wolves. Whoosh! The bowstring was pulled taut, and then the arrow flew forwards in a straight line towards Zen. Are you still not dodging? Fanny had created the Perfection Storm Arrow herself. She was extremely proud of it as it was also her strongest attack. However, she began to have second thoughts after she fired that arrow. While she hoped that she could hit and kill Zen, she was also worried about this monster's terrifying defensive abilities. If her arrow hit him straight on the head but he would still be unharmed, she would definitely be frustrated. But just as Fanny fired her arrow, a black figure appeared. The black figure wore a black, skin-tight nightgown. It left a blurry shadow-like image before it disappeared completely, like a ghost. Meanwhile, the golden arrow quickly hit Zen straight on the chest. The golden wind blades that circled the arrow wrapped around Zen's body like a shadow. Then, they began to cut and slice into his body like mad. At the same time, that black figure appeared again behind Zen without a sound. The figure held a silver dagger and stabbed Zen's back. At that moment, Zen's whole body was entirely covered with golden wind blades. World lords considered those golden wind blades to be extremely powerful. However, they wouldn't damage the black figure since the black figure had sneaked into the back of the world. Ding! The short silver dagger dug into Zen's back. A crisp sound was heard, but even his clothes remained undamaged. The wind blades dissipated and the black shadow retreated. The figure stood side by side with Fanny. While the black figure was dressed in all black, the exposed skin was alabaster. She was the other world lord who guarded the prison island, Sammy. She raised her head to meet Zen's eyes in a serious stare. She had a deep understanding of assassination and had coordinated with Fanny to try to kill the human youth in a single strike. She had an accurate grasp of about everything related to stealth murder, whether it was timing or speed. She didn't expect that even this person's clothes hadn't been pierced through. You two, you can stop now. I'm really just here to look for someone, Zen said as the smile on his face began to fade a little. The two world lords of the demon knight race now held no anger towards this invulnerable world lord. Fanny clearly understood their disparity in strength, so she asked, "Who are you looking for?" "Her name is Amber, and she is imprisoned on this island," said Zen. Amber. Sammy arched one fine brow. Those who were imprisoned in the prison island were not ordinary, but there were a few exceptions. The two world lords clearly knew about Amber because among those who had been sentenced to the punishment of corrosion, Amber had the lowest cultivation level, being only at the Soul Sea realm. Except her, most were at the Spirit Transformation realm. There were even a few world lords. Back when Amber was first brought to the prison, many of them felt odd after they knew that she was a newly ascended warrior. They all wondered how this newly ascended warrior offended their queen. "Why are you looking for her?" Fanny asked. Zen smiled. "To save her, of course. Prisoners on the prison island are only qualified to be taken away at the Queen's personal orders," Sammy interjected in a cold voice. "You aren't strong enough to stop me," Zen replied. At those words, the two world lords quickly turned silent. This human youth in front of them was strangely calm. They had already used their most powerful moves on him without holding back. Yet, he never once showed any intention of retaliating at all. He wasn't exaggerating, they truly were no match to him. "Even if we aren't, we won't give up," Sammy said in a tone even firmer than Fanny's. Although all the elites of the demon knight race were out in the war, as the guardians of the prison island, they would not cower in the face of an intruder. On the other hand, Fanny just looked at Zen. After she had fully sized him up, she suddenly felt that this human youth's voice was quite familiar. He had a world lord's cultivation level, and possessed such terrifying strength at only a young age. There weren't many warriors like him in the entire universe. "Who are you?" Fanny asked. Zen smiled. He had no intention of hiding anything at all. "I am Zen Luo." It makes sense now, Fanny thought. Her guess was verified, he really was the famed young warrior, Zen. Sammy stared at Zen in a daze. She knew that his voice had often echoed throughout the universe. Moreover, his grudge towards Elena was also well known. However, the most important thing was that Zen had another queen of the demon knight race with him. "Don't resist. It's meaningless. I don't want to implicate the innocent," Zen said. His calm gaze swept over the two women before he turned around and chose a direction to walk in. It wasn't difficult to find Amber through the Will of Worlds, so he was very clear about her location. The two world lords behind him briefly looked at each other, and finally decided to give up. They no longer attacked Zen, but at the same time, the human youth piqued their curiosity. This should be Zen's first time on the prison island, so why was he able to pinpoint where Amber was? After Zen had traveled through miles of the soldering iron pillars, he finally stopped in front of one huge soldering iron pillar. Tied onto the iron pillar's surface was Amber, whose entire body was covered with corrosion marks. Her long hair reached the ground and her eyes were tightly shut. Upon closer inspection, Zen saw that her soul had also weakened. When he saw her appearance, guilt bubbled up in his chest. Zen had given Amber hope and had promised that he would take her out of the unpleasant prison in 3 years, but his past situation and strength did not allow him to do so. And so, Amber had suffered for much longer. Chapter 16:15. The Rain of Pain. Drip, drip, drip. The repetitive pit-a-pat of the black raindrops on the ground filled the area. The prison island was located in a black sea, whose seawater was extremely corrosive. No living beings could survive in it. The seawater rose and evaporated until the water coagulated in the air and gathered above the prison island. Those water drops turned into the very raindrops that splattered on the ground. The demon knight called such type of corrosive rain as the rain of pain. The 7th generation queen of punishment had invented a new kind of artistic punishment upon her discovery of the place in the rain, which was second only to the punishment of eternal night. Buzz, buzz. 2 light chirping sounds were heard in the air before Fanny and Sammy, who both stood behind Zen, condensed a protective life vitality. The raindrops that fell on their protective life vitality hissed with sizzling sounds. It turned out that the rain of pain was corroding their protective life vitality. Even though they were world lords, they didn't dare make contact with the rain of pain. If such a level of corrosive rain could melt gold and pierce iron, it was also able to fully touch a martial artist's pain. Needless to say, the pain was immensely incomparable. Meanwhile, Zen was showered with the raindrops but didn't react at all. The water drops slid along his skin and did not corrode his body. The raindrops even seemed to be like ordinary water on him. When the two world lords of the demon knight race saw the scene, confusion dawned on their faces. Just what was Zen's physical body made of? The two world lords guarded the island. They even needed to protect their first-rank divine weapons from the rain of pain as well. Yet, Zen didn't seem to be affected as he completely ignored the rain of pain. Swish! A raindrop fell on Amber's body. Amber, who was originally suspended above the ground, suddenly trembled and groaned in pain. At the same time, numerous pained howls reverberated off the confines of the prison island. Prolonged exposure to agony could numb a person's sense of pain. Such was a martial artist's form of self-protection. On one hand, the huge pillars on the prison island actually contained the strong life law. Those pillars were made by the 7th generation Queen of Life and were actually trees of divine weapon level. Those trees were also prone to damage from the rain of pain, but they could use the life law to restore their own bodies and also the warriors who were tied to the pillars. The only difference was that the trees which were used to make the pillars were resistant to pain, while the martial artists who were tied to them suffered from it. Ah! Black water droplets splashed against Amber's body. A few black holes scarred her usually snow-white back, and a faint white mist rose out of them. At that moment, the pillar released an immense amount of life energy and the holes on Amber's body were quickly healed. The newly patched up flesh in different colors became smoother. Yet at the same time her flesh had been repaired, more raindrops fell and the newly repaired flesh was corroded again, and then repaired once more. The cycle was endless, and it was also the most painful. The entire prison island was like a purgatory. Countless members of the demon knight race all howled in various screams of pained cries and curses. Some of them, like Amber, managed to remain silent. Zen walked forward and with a light flick of his hand, he put an invisible force above Amber's head. The moment the raindrops splattered down, Zen's invisible force repelled them. The life law inside the pillar then restored Amber's broken skin within 10 seconds. Yet, her eyes had yet to open. It didn't take long when Amber finally felt something strange. As long as the pillar emitted life energy, the rain of pain wouldn't stop. The past few years were no exception. Amber stretched out a hand and brushed a strand of hair away from her face. Her eyes abruptly fluttered open, and in front of her was a handsome young man. Amber was slightly stunned as she stared openly at Zen. Ever since they had parted ways in the illusion battlefield, Zen's promise had been engraved in Amber's heart. It served as her greatest motivation to keep living. Every time someone's voice rang out through the universe by means of the roaring token, Amber had always listened carefully no matter how painful it was. Yet as time passed by and the situation progressed, Amber realized that things had only gotten more and more disadvantageous. While she might have not known much, she knew that there was a race called the Sacred Race that had waged a war against the humans through the roaring token. She also found out that the Demon Knight race and the Sacred Race had formed an alliance, which made everything more complicated. 3 years had quickly passed by, but Zen did not arrive at the scheduled time. Then again, Amber had never received any news about Zen's death. She knew how Zen was, and as long as he was alive, he would never give up. Just recently, Zen's voice rang out once more. His message was a declaration of war against the Sacred Race. In that case, he might not be able to save Amber, and even after a few years, he still probably wouldn't be qualified to fight against the Demon Knight race. But Amber never expected to see Zen in only less than a month. She even suspected that she was dreaming. However, dreams did not exist in the prison island. Besides, no one could even sleep a wink in such painful conditions. Even if they were able to, it would only be full of nightmares. Zen, there was confusion in Amber's eyes, because behind Zen were the 2 world lords of the Demon Knight race as well. Zen smiled faintly at Amber with apologetic eyes. "I'm sorry, I'm late." After he finished speaking, he gently tapped his finger. The vine which bound Amber tightly was instantly broken into pieces. Amber quickly fell down, her body lying limp on the ground. The many years of being eroded by the rain of pain had left her completely naked. Her cheeks bloomed red when she faced Zen, and she struggled to keep her long legs together. At the same time, she stared at the 2 world lords behind Zen and croaked, "But they." Zen's sudden entry into the prison island should have warranted an arrest by the prison guards. However, there were 2 world lords with him right now who didn't seem to stop him at all. Zen brought out a thick blanket from his space ring and draped it around Amber's body. "It's all right, they can't defeat me," he said with a smile. Nevertheless, Amber lowered her head to stare at the ground. Even if they couldn't beat Zen, they shouldn't just watch her like that. Moreover, Zen's answer just made her even more perplexed. Of course, Amber did not know anything. It wasn't that those 2 world lords didn't want to stop Zen, but rather, Zen was far too powerful for them. Zen could kill them very easily. A battle against the 2 world lords would simply be a child's play for him. It didn't matter if they used all the means they had, Zen could still deal with them effortlessly. Therefore, why would they even bother? Now, they could only stand behind Zen and watch. Elena implemented extremely strict rules. All of the prisoners in the prison island were not allowed to escape. If Zen took Amber away, the 2 world lords would most likely receive severe punishments. All the elites of the Demon Knight race were currently out for the battle. In any case, Elena didn't have the time and energy to manage the prison island for the time being. After Zen had saved Amber, he turned around to face the 2 world lords of the Demon Knight and asked, "Do you know why I didn't kill you?" In turn, the 2 world lords cautiously glanced at each other. They had seen the extent of Zen's power. They clearly knew that it was indeed impossible for them to even compare to him. "Because I consider the Demon Knight members as my friends," Zen surprisingly said with a smile. If the 2 Demon Knight world lords had been surprised by Zen's expression just moments ago, they were now completely flabbergasted. Although the Demon Knight betrayed the entire universe, the ones who betrayed the universe aren't you, but your queens. Zen's voice gradually turned cold as he spoke. The Demon Knight doesn't only have 2 queens, and there is a third one. Just then, traces of blood-red light glowed in Zen's eyes together with a malicious aura. He suddenly seemed to inherit Lavender's aura as he continued, "I will represent the Queen of Killings and eliminate the 2 other queens." Amber, who was still wrapped in the blanket, looked at Zen's broad back. Her face immediately lit up when she heard Zen's words, followed by a gratified smile. As for the 2 world lords, they took a deep breath. In the past, any member of the Demon Knight would undoubtedly punish any reckless person who dared to make such rude remarks to protect their queen's honor. They were even willing to sacrifice their own lives. Besides, those two world lords behind Zen belonged to the Saint Chain sect, which supported the Queen of Punishment. However, what Elena had done made the Demon Knight a notorious race for betraying the entire universe. Chapter 16:16, Tearing the Cloud. When a force of the human race reached its peak, it would form either a divine kingdom or a sacred place. The other races in the universe were about the same and approximately on the same level, but the Demon Knight was rather special. Strictly speaking, the Demon Knight was similar to the secret sect in the Thoughtless Minds. However, the secret sects in the Thoughtless Minds were only present for absorbing faith energy, and never developed to the point of being capable of ruling over a force. The larger and smaller secret sects were still there, serving the four great clans. As for the Demon Knight though, they were under complete control of the three queens. Of course, the cause of this kind of social structure was in Murphy. His goal was to use his soul-sealing needle to have the three queens lead the Demon Knight to rebellion. Yes, the Demon Knight was absolutely loyal to their queens. However, they, as intelligent creatures, disagreed from the depths of their bones with their queen's actions. Lavender, however, still hadn't returned to her throne. The Demon Knight members couldn't disobey the orders given by the other two queens, and therefore had to brace themselves and follow them instead. Even though Fanny and Sammy belonged to the Saint Chain sect, their hearts became agitated when they heard Zen speak. If they had a different queen, the Demon Knight would probably thrive. At that very moment, both of them were sharing this same thought. Whether it was rational or emotional, they were willing to side with both the human race and Zen. And yet, they equally couldn't betray their queens. The Demon Knight's traitors were also known as the Queens, abandoned children, and would be regarded as the greatest disgrace to their clan. It was safe to say that a good majority of the Demon Knight members would rather bear the most painful punishment than betray their queens. From the moment they were born, the pride of being a follower to their queens had already been engraved in their hearts. Thus, when this idea came to Fanny and Sammy, they felt frightened by their own thoughts. Coming from them, this kind of thinking was simply outrageous. Once the idea had been born though, it became impossible to restrain. The idea grew uncontrollable and went berserk. We can't betray our queens, Fanny stated and shook her head stubbornly. Not now, but who knows what will happen in the future, said Zen in a flat tone, looking up at the sky. In the air above the sea, his eyes had settled on a massive black cloud. This cloud had gathered on the prison island, forming a storm of its own. A rain of pain was falling. All of a sudden, Zen rose up from the ground in a brisk motion, his hands violently spiraling. The 9 stars in his body slowly rotated and an invisible force began circling between his two hands. The power of the attack suddenly struck out, distorting the surrounding space. Whoosh! Zen clenched his fist and quickly punched it toward the sky. Boom! A muffled sound came from above. The black cloud once hovering atop the prison island was instantly torn apart by this tremendous force. Like shredded cloth, the cloud dispersed almost immediately in strips that scattered in all directions. Seconds later, the storm had completely dissipated, and the falling black rain had stopped. Zen lowered his head and swept his gaze over the two world lords. His figure suddenly flashed as he charged toward another pillar. Fanny and Sammy obviously knew what Zen was attempting to do. Sammy frowned as she tried to rush over. Before she got anywhere though, Fanny reached out and grabbed her. She shook her head and said, "You can't stop him." But," Sammy stammered. "We can't let him do that." Sammy was now shouting angrily. Fanny stood her ground though, shaking her head. "The current situation isn't something we have control over anymore." Maybe what he said was right. There was no right or wrong when it came to racial conflict. From the Demon Knight's perspective, Zen was definitely their enemy. But just now though, Zen had greatly influenced them with Lavender's aura. Zen sped toward another pillar. On this one, a Demon Knight World Lord was bound tightly. From the pillar, the World Lord raised his head to look up at the dissipating black cloud, his eyes revealing a look of astonishment. It seemed to him as though the cloud had been dispersed by a person, but how could something like that happen here on the prison island? While he was still trying to process his astonishment, an extremely fast figure dove over from the side and stopped right in front of him. What could it be? A human being? The World Lord's facial features were now distorted with confusion. Zen waved his hand gently and the vine binding the World Lord broke apart. He didn't pause a moment longer before moving on to the next pillar in line. The people he was rescuing were all prisoners of the Demon Knight. Moreover, those who were locked up on the prison island were said to be great sinners to the demon knight. They were thus imprisoned here for a variety of strange reasons. Many of them had high cultivation base, most of them were at the spirit transformation realm, and another portion of them were even world lords. After being rescued though, the demon knight members were still extremely weak. Thanks to their cultivation base however, they recovered their strength quite quickly. It wasn't before long that a few of the world lords regained enough of their mobility to head towards Zen. And that was when Amber also decided to stand up. She looked around at her clansmen, who were slowly closing in on her. She didn't say anything because she had no idea what Zen was planning to do. The gathered members of the Demon Knight now glared at Sammy and Fanny, hatred written all over their faces. No matter the reason why these Demon Knight members were imprisoned here, Elena would always remain the root cause. Therefore, these martial artists held a great enmity towards the Saint Chain sect, and they only instinctively held a hostile attitude towards Sammy and Fanny as well. The Demon Knight members' strength hadn't completely recovered, the life vitality in their bodies hadn't yet condensed, and the ability to take action was still non-existent. Once everyone from the Demon Knight on the prison island had gathered, Zen looked around and asked, "Are you willing to follow me? Who are you, and why did you save us?" A world lord of the Demon Knight asked, bewildered, staring at Zen. "We, the Demon Knight, will not follow a human," stated another world lord, speaking for everyone. Despite being in such a terrible situation, the Demon Knight members still remained noble. Even in dire straits, together, they would face it very gracefully. They might have had nowhere to go, but there was no way that they'd casually follow a human. Buzz. The red light in Zen's eyes flickered slightly. In this type of position, he knew his only option was to use Lavender's soul once again. "What if I can represent the Queen of Killings?" Zen asked, with confidence in his voice. Humph. How could a mere human world lord represent our queen? Wait a second, why do you suddenly have our queen's aura? How is that possible? On the prison island, there were quite a few warriors from the Saint Spear sect, and they had supported Lavender the entire time. What was more, they had originally been sent to the prison island by Elena because they kept resisting. They were familiar with Lavender's aura, which was an impossible one to fake. Because he is Zen Luo, and our queen is attached to him. Amber suddenly said, in a matter-of-fact tone. Upon hearing Amber's words, all of the Demon Knight's martial artists present immediately figured out what exactly was going on. Their eyes each filled with awe as they looked at Zen in amazement. Although they were imprisoned here, the verbal battle between Zen and Elena had spread throughout the entire universe several years ago, and they too had heard it clearly. Zen was Amber's hope, and similarly, he was also their sliver of hope. If Zen were to return with Lavender and even helped her return to her throne, then they would someday be free from oppression. "If our queen's soul still exists, why can't she show herself?" asked one of the world lords. It was true that in the past, Lavender could show herself in the form of the sword spirit. This time though, she was nothing more than a soul fragment attached to Zen's body. She had even lost her memories. But then, how was it possible for Zen to make her show up? There's something wrong with her soul. Zen couldn't explain it thoroughly. If Lavender hadn't erased the soul-sealing needle, she'd have ended up being just like Elena, who chose to be the entire universe's enemy at all costs. However, erasing the soul-sealing needle caused her to lose all her memories. Zen continued, "If you're willing to follow me, I will take you to meet someone, an important man." "Who is he? Is he a member of our Demon Knight?" The people of the Demon Knight pressed on with their questions, anxiously. Zen nodded his head and replied, "A supreme lord of your Demon Knight, Leroy." The three queens were the true leaders of the Demon Knight, but supreme lord in the Demon Knight wasn't anything to be scoffed at either. As a member of the Demon Knight, Supreme Lord Leroy had both a high status and great charisma. In order to avoid Elena's encirclement, Supreme Lord Leroy went into hiding. He thus remained in hiding for many, many years, never revealing himself until now. The crux of the issue was that Supreme Lord Leroy also belonged to the Saint Spear sect. Most of the people present were members of the Saint Spear sect, so they were naturally eager to see Leroy in person. "Where is he?" someone asked again. "I want to see him," another warrior cried. Everyone expressed their utmost desire to see Supreme Lord Leroy. Finding this Supreme Lord was already a part of Zen's plan. He nodded to the crowd and said, "Everyone, follow me and I will lead you directly to Supreme Lord Leroy." Chapter 16-17, The Collapse of Belief. No secrets could be kept from Zen in the areas covered by the will of the worlds. It was therefore quite simple for Zen to find Supreme Lord Leroy's location of hiding. This time, Zen's objective was very clear. To kill the 2 other queens of the Demon Knight at the lowest of costs. After making the Demon Knight abandon their attack, he would focus all his attention on fighting against the sacred race. Zen, though, was an outsider after all, and there still hadn't been any reaction from Lavender's soul. All he could do now was place his hopes in the Demon Knight's Supreme Lord Leroy. The Demon Knight members that were present had faces that were still brimming with confusion. Supreme Lord Leroy had disappeared for many years. 10 years ago, it was unknown whether or not he was still alive at that time. Years had already passed since Supreme Lord Leroy had spoken through the roaring token, which proved that he hadn't died at the time. Zen had now suddenly told them that he could bring them to see Supreme Lord Leroy. For the Demon Knight members, the latter was still very hard to believe. On another note, it was undeniable that this human youth before them had Lavender's soul attached to him. This Zen guy probably knew more than what they had ever known. Hence, they couldn't help but feel a strong sense of anticipation. Zen didn't say another word. He lightly flicked the teleportation token in his hand and a streak of blazing light appeared in front of him. "Everyone, please follow me," said Zen, as he stepped into the vortex of light and disappeared right before their eyes. The beam of blazing light continued to spin in front of everyone, like a gate leading to another strange world. Despite the magical sight, a trace of hesitation still pulsed through the group. Should they really follow a warrior from another race? After all, to a certain extent, following Zen was tantamount to betraying the Demon Knight. To the loyal Demon Knight members, this was even more painful than being tortured by the punishment of eternal night. Amber suddenly acted instinctively, without any hesitation at all. She walked toward the beam of light, her bare feet leading the way. Beneath the blazing white light, her snow-white face looked extremely beautiful. It was as if she was suddenly bathing in a pool of holy light. She spoke loudly, "I'm a Demon Knight warrior that ascended from the lower world." When the Demon Knight members heard her speak, a confused expression appeared on their faces. There were over 3,000 Demon Knight members that had been saved by Zen, and among them were over 1,000 World Lords as well as 2 Grand World Lords. These Demon Knight warriors were practically all from noble families and great clans of the Demon Knight race, and because they had offended Elena, they were imprisoned on the prison island. In comparison, Amber came off as a misfit to them. She was only a Soul Sea Realm warrior and it seemed as though she had literally just stepped into the Soul Sea Realm not too long ago. Now that they heard Amber confirm that she had ascended from the lower world, a revelation came over the group concerning her ordinary cultivation level. Simultaneously, they were equally confused. Why exactly was there a Demon Knight member of the lower world imprisoned here on the prison island? The Demon Knight warriors had specifications for being locked up here. Not everyone was qualified to be taken to prison island. I watched Zen as he grew stronger. And even then, our Queen of Killings was already attached to him. Amber continued, "It was at that time that I offended the Queen of Punishment, so that's why I was imprisoned here. Regarding the dispute between queens, I have no right to make any comment. What I can say is that I believe in Zen, not Lavender. He can carry the Demon Knight out of this predicament." Once her statement completed, Amber turned her head and entered the bright beam of light. Amber's words were actually quite outrageous, if not to say ridiculous. She said she didn't believe in Lavender, but chose to believe in a human instead. The faces of the Demon Knight members became stunned at once. There was a known proverb that spread in the language of the Demon Knight race. If it was translated into straightforward words, it basically meant that although taking the life of a Demon Knight member was simple, it would be very difficult to make them betray their own race. Right now though, Amber was basically announcing that she had betrayed the Demon Knight race and was going to follow a human warrior. "I want to meet Supreme Lord Leroy." One of the Demon Knight World Lords finally spoke, making up her mind. She walked towards the blazing light, her slender figure promptly disappearing into it. "I want to see him, too." A second member of the Demon Knight race also walked over and went into the beam of light. Actually, for the most of them, they thought the same as Amber did. They might have chosen to believe Zen, but their experiences were different from Amber's, and they were therefore unwilling to speak out in front of everyone. Supreme Lord Leroy had become their best excuse for following Zen. As a result, more and more members of the Demon Knight race walked into the beam of light Zen had created. It certainly didn't take long before all of the Demon Knight's warriors had left, all except for Sammy and Fanny. "Don't you want to stop them?" Sammy asked Fanny, who was beside her. Fanny bit her lip hard. The taste of blood immediately spread to her mouth. "I'm not sure why, but I feel like they did the right thing." The two of them belonged to the Saint Chain sect and were followers of the Queen of Punishment. True, their stance was completely different, but right now, Fanny's heart began to waver. That's not an illusion, Sammy said with a smile. I also have a feeling that they did the right thing. At these words, Fanny turned her head and stared at Sammy, something strange happening in her eyes. Exchanging glares now, both could see the peculiar look that had come over them, as if a layer of paper had been pierced. It was as if a man and a woman in secret love with each other had finally seen through to each other's thoughts. Do you really want to go, too? Yes, everyone else has gone already, no one is left here. I'll come with you, wait for me. In the space created by the teleportation token, over 3,000 members of the Demon Knight were now floating around. The Demon Knight members looked around curiously, but they couldn't figure out what kind of space they found themselves in. It was as if all the supreme worlds in this entire universe were condensed into this space. Zen continued to watch the beam of light. He chose not to close it, as if he was waiting for something. Everyone has already entered, Amber softly mentioned to Zen, as she floated beside him. Zen smiled faintly. At that point, the white spinning light in front of him suddenly flashed, and a black figure floated out from the spinning light. Not far behind the first, another red figure also appeared. It was Fanny and Sammy. Many of the Demon Knight world lords immediately raised their eyebrows, glaring at the two with hostility. Are you still trying to court death? A Grand World Lord stared coldly at Fanny and Sammy. After the recovery period, the life vitality within this Grand World Lord's body had mostly been restored. Although she wasn't in her peak condition, protecting herself from the two World Lords was far from being a problem. Moreover, there were thousands of Demon Knight members behind her. Sammy's brows furrowed and a trace of sternness appeared on her face. Upon noticing, Fanny pulled Sammy behind her and smiled amiably at the crowd. I think we should join you. To the Demon Knight members, this was an era that had witnessed the collapse of their belief. Alina's and Latonia's unpopular decision had already dragged the Demon Knight into the abyss. The entire Demon Knight race was filled with internal contradictions, but not a single one of them had stepped up to take the lead for a change. If Lavender didn't erase the soul-sealing needle, then she too would be controlled by it. Before long, she would join the actions of Elena and Latonia. Now, Zen was acting on Lavender's behalf in order to become the bellwether of the Demon Knight. When Murphy had originally created this race, he would have never expected something of the sort. He couldn't grasp the idea that a queen would be capable of escaping his control. Moreover, he hadn't thought that this queen would sacrifice tens of thousands of years, her great willpower and all of her memories in order to erase the soul-sealing needle. Everyone followed behind Zen, as they all traveled through the space. This space had almost marked the entire upper world of the universe. It was like a huge map and it was impossible not to feel like a tiny speck of nothingness. They were all very curious though. This emotion far outweighed the rest. They weren't aware of what this space was. Soon, Zen selected a supreme world and opened a beam of blazing spinning light, right at the top of it. He was the first to enter. One by one, the Demon Knight members followed Zen into the blazing light. Upon seeing the world in front of them, their eyes were filled with disbelief. They finally understood that the space they had passed through had connected all the supreme worlds in the universe. Zen could travel through the universe at will. Is this the Purple Snow world? Is it really possible that we just passed through over 900 supreme worlds? How did he even do it? In this universe, only a few people knew of the magic of teleportation token. Nathan, Lucille, and a few of the others were all very surprised when they had traveled through the teleportation token, for example. They were godly geniuses after all, and they were used to seeing all kinds of magical weapons. But the group of Demon Knight members that had followed Zen here were different. Their eyes were filled with disbelief instead, especially the Grand World Lords. Instantly crossing thousands of supreme worlds was only something that a supreme lord could achieve. Not just that, but even a supreme lord wouldn't be able to lead thousands of people in crossing such a long distance. Chapter 16:18, Scorching Sun Arrow. The Purple Snow world was located on the westernmost side of the Demon Knight's territory. Here, there weren't any important mineral resources, and the vitality between heaven and earth wasn't very rich either. Overall, it couldn't be considered a strategic location. Thus, within this supreme world, there wasn't even a 10th grade sacred place. There were only a few small sacred places of the Demon Knight that had gathered in the Purple Snow world. The only special characteristic of this world was its beautiful scenery. All year round, a light, fluffy, purple kind of snowflake floated here, covering the mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas. The entire place was coated with an illusory hue. The Demon Knight members remained stunned for a long while before they came back to their senses. One of the leading Grand World Lords asked Zen, as our Demon Knight's Supreme Lord Leroy in the Purple Snow World. Back then, when the battle between the two queens ended, Supreme Lord Leroy had also been heavily injured, but he had escaped. The Demon Knight had also tried to find Supreme Lord Leroy, but this universe was simply too vast. If a Supreme Lord wanted to hide, there were plenty of ways to do so. No one would have expected that Supreme Lord Leroy hadn't gotten out of the Demon Knight's territory. Instead, he had been hiding in a large border Supreme World. As long as it was a Supreme World occupied by the Will of Worlds, no secrets could get by Zen. He had discovered Supreme Lord Leroy's location after searching idly through the memories of World's Will. Zen simply nodded and said, "Everyone, follow me." He couldn't guarantee that every Demon Knight member that followed him was absolutely honest, but even if he revealed Supreme Lord Leroy's location now, it didn't matter much. The universe's situation had already progressed to its final step. Whether it was the battle between the human race and the Demon Knight, the human race and the sacred race, the different races and the sacred race, all of them were waiting for a showdown. The godly genius of the sacred race, Maha, had issued a challenge to fight within the Sunflower Water world in order to push everything toward a showdown as soon as possible. Zen equally felt that it couldn't wait any longer. Before the showdown though, he had to get the Demon Knight back on his side. In the midst of the purple snow, Zen's body resembled a leaf, swiftly floating downward. Meanwhile, Amber and the other members of the Demon Knight followed closely behind. Below the crowd was a huge mountain range. These snowy mountains were covered in purple, making them look like a sleeping dragon that stretched endlessly. Once Zen had slowly sunk into the depths of the mountains, he immediately dipped into a valley created by two steep triangles. Roar, 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 roar. On both sides of the valley, a few gigantic, purple fierce bears could be heard roaring at the crowd in the sky. Their roars reverberated throughout the valley, giving off an extremely terrifying sound. Zen led the way with an expressionless face, not giving in whatsoever to the bears' fierce provocation. A Demon Knight Grand World Lord glanced at the roaring bears and frowned in an instant. Two circles of red light, one big and one small, appeared in the Grand World Lord's pupils. The big circle of light started to shrink, and the small circle of light kept enlarging. Suddenly, the two circles of light began to converge. And as they did, a formless aura spread out from the Grand World Lord's body. The instant the purple fierce bears came into contact with this aura, the originally noisy bears seemed to have met their greatest nemesis. Ahu! The purple bears, no longer fierce, all turned around at the same time and retreated back into their individual caves, not daring to make another sound. Humph! The Demon Knight Grand World Lord coldly snorted and then chased downward after them. A Demon Knight warrior, long locked up on Prison Island, definitely had an extraordinary strength and talent. When he arrived at the bottom of the valley, Zen circled around. However, he didn't find any entrance hiding here. Supreme Lord Leroy had been hiding at this exact location for many years. As a Supreme Lord, once he was underground, he would have only naturally changed the layout of this place, sealing off all paths that led to his hideout. If Zen couldn't find a path, he'd only have to create one for himself. Zen found a flat spot in the rock and with a wave of his hand, all the surrounding snow was immediately blown away. He then bent down and pressed his hand to the ground. With a light tap of his finger, a rumbling noise began to sound. Not long after, the ground beneath Zen's feet split open and a bottomless hole appeared. Zen nodded at Amber, who was behind him, and slipped down into the big hole. Amber followed closely behind, and the rest of the Demon Knight members didn't hesitate a moment longer. Since they had already followed Zen here, nothing would stop them now, even if it was dangerous. That was when Zen, with a single tap of his finger, opened up a vertical well that ran as deep as 10 miles. When Zen reached the bottom of the deep well, he repeated the same movement, pointing downward. The well continued to stretch. After repeating this over 100 times, the deep well that extended from the valley to the underground had reached a depth of over 1,000 miles. Looking up, one could no longer see the entrance of the well at all. How long is it before we can reach our destination? One of the world lords was beginning to lose her patience. Very soon, replied Zen, keeping his calm. When Zen tapped his finger at the bottom to deepen the well once more, the bottom of the well finally pierced through, revealing a huge cave underneath. Zen entered first of course, and upon doing so, he noticed his surroundings were densely packed with small karst caves. The karst caves, thousands of miles below the surface, were formed tens of millions of years ago. There used to be a rich underground river here. Which path should we take? The warriors were curious and asking questions, now. The densely packed karst caves formed a natural, giant maze. A sudden general worry that Zen would not be capable of finding the correct path took over. It might have been difficult for the others, but it was far from being a big deal for Zen. The memories he had in his mind not only allowed him to accurately distinguish between each cave, but also provided the information about the process of how they were formed and evolved in the past. Zen wasn't omnipotent in this universe. Only Mike possessed such an ability. However, if the will of worlds were to spread throughout the universe, then he would be in an omniscient state. He would be able to see through all the secrets in this world. That ability was also very powerful. Just follow close, Zen replied, before choosing a cave and flying into it. There were very few creatures that existed in such a deep underground. However, as they traveled through the zigzagging cave, they encountered more than a dozen fierce beasts. Most of these creatures were not a threat to the warriors, but there was a kind of eyeless frog that had almost killed one of the world lords. This kind of colorful frog emitted a terrifying poison. After traveling horizontally underground for hundreds of miles, they finally arrived at the end of the karst cave. When they reached its end, they realized that the cave was flat from top to bottom. Apparently, it was handmade. What was more, it seemed that someone was living here. Zen grounded his feet on the floor below him and slowly walked forward, a look of vigilance wrinkling his features. He knew that Supreme Lord Leroy was here, but Supreme Lord Leroy was unaware of Zen's arrival. If he rashly rushed in, it might attract Supreme Lord Leroy's counterattack. Even if Supreme Lord Leroy was injured, a Supreme Lord's tricks remained very terrifying. Just as Zen was about to turn a corner, a golden beam of light suddenly shot toward him. Hiss! The golden stream of light was only as thick as his little finger and it slid past Zen's nose, just missing him by a hair. With such an outrageous speed, the stream of light seemed to have completely disregarded the laws of space. Zen hadn't realized what it was just yet. It's the scorching sun arrow. Demon Knight martial artist's excited voice sounded from behind him. Supreme Lord Leroy is really and truly here. Supreme Lord Leroy's full name was Leroy Meng. The Demon Knight race was the most proficient in archery of all in the universe. Before Leroy carried the heavenly destiny, he was also the most powerful archer in the Demon Knight race. Scorching Sun Arrow was one of Leroy's unique techniques. Supreme Lord Leroy, my name is Abby, a Grand World Lord of Demon Knight impatiently shouted. Her voice echoed in the depths of the cave, loud and clear. Most of the Demon Knight members present were from the Saint Spear sect, and Leroy was originally the World Lord of this same sect. Later on, with the help of Lavender, Leroy carried a heavenly destiny and became a Supreme Lord. Among these Demon Knight members, it was only expected that there were people who were very familiar with Leroy. This Grand World Lord, the one who went by the name of Abby, was related to Supreme Lord Leroy by blood. As her voice echoed through the cave, she waited, but there was no response that came back from the depths. Abby's anxiety seemed to be climbing somewhat and an overwhelming feeling to rush into the cave washed over her. As she passed by Zen though, he extended his hand and grabbed her by the waist, pulling her back abruptly. Shiz! Another golden ray of light flashed past the two of them this time. The arrow had come so close to Abby's bangs that it left a burning gash on her forehead. Although it was only a minor wound, it was still extremely dangerous. Had it gone just an inch deeper, her entire upper skull would have been lifted right off by this arrow. Chapter 16:19, Shattering the Scorching Sun Arrows. As Zen pulled Abby back, there was a fresh bloody wound on her forehead and her face was deathly pale. If it wasn't for Zen pulling her, her head would have already been separated from her body. The Demon Knight members present looked at each other in absolute dismay. The person hiding inside had to be Supreme Lord Leroy. Supreme Lord Leroy, on the other hand, was very vigilant, and therefore, they couldn't even get close to him. What should we do? Abby wiped the wound on her forehead before tying a ribbon to it, in order to stop the bleeding. Minutes before, she had made the effort to identify herself, but Supreme Lord Leroy had still attacked her. Would he allow anyone to get close? Let me deal with him, Zen said flatly. But it's too dangerous. Abby thought that her cultivation level was higher than Zen's, and so was her strength. If even she was almost killed by the scorching sun arrow, then there was no way Zen would survive. He would certainly place himself in great danger if he chose to fight. Zen smiled noncommittally and headed toward the corner. The Demon Knight members in the rear all opened their eyes wide as they watched Zen, greatly worried about him. They had chosen to follow Zen and had ultimately found Supreme Lord Leroy, but Zen didn't deserve to be killed by him. Not right now, at least. Only Amber's gaze remained as calm as usual. She was confident in Zen, because she knew what kind of person he was. He would never act rashly. If he had decided to make a move, then he must know what he was doing. Zen slowly approached the corner. The moment he neared it, his footsteps suddenly quickened and his speed increased explosively. His physical strength now reached a point where it was much more powerful than before. Moreover, he was also wearing the redemption armor made from the source of the godly tile. It wouldn't be too difficult for him to block the scorching sun arrow. Whoosh! Accompanied by a giant gust of wind, a golden light flashed across Zen's eyes. The speed of the arrow was simply too fast. Even Zen couldn't react in time. Through instinct, he protected his head, which was the only thing he managed to do. After all, his entire body was wrapped in the redemption armor, and only his head was exposed. He didn't want his head to be hit by the scorching sun arrow. Clap! While Zen held both arms up in order to protect his head, a heavy blow suddenly came for his body. It was as if a sledgehammer had struck him, and his entire body heavily crashed into the side of the cave. The arrow was aimed straight at his chest. Luckily though, just as Holy Drew had said, the redemption armor couldn't be destroyed as it was forged with the source of the godly tile. The terrifying power contained within the arrow only sent Zen flying a few hundred feet away. With a roll, Zen stood back up, and set his feet firmly on the ground. Why? A puzzled voice came from somewhere in the darkness. Zen, now standing, wanted to open his mouth to speak, but he saw two golden lights flash in the distance once again. Supreme! Clap! Clap! Another two crisp sounds could be heard echoing through the cave. Two scorching sun arrows flashed with golden lights and hit Zen's redemption armor. The golden arrowheads then shattered to pieces. The huge force pushed Zen back another 100 feet away. As he ferociously hit the wall of the cave, everything began to shake and crumble. These arrows had been shot before he even had the chance to utter a sound. And now, he couldn't help but feel the burning sensation overwhelming his heart. Just as he broke free from the cave wall, a sword miraculously appeared in his hand. Great weighty sword, break! He brandished his great weighty sword. This heavy sword, comparable to a great world, felt abnormally light in Zen's hands. After the great weighty sword drew an arc in the air, the sword's glow accurately and perfectly intersected with the two golden lights. Crack! Crack! With two crisp sounds, Zen actually succeeded in shattering the two scorching sun arrows. What the heck? Another surprised voice came from the darkness. The Demon Knight members hiding on the other side had expressions of disbelief etched on their faces, their eyes wide with awe. Abby, the Grand World Lord, also had her eyes open wide with surprise. Zen waved the great weighty sword in his hand. When he noticed the Demon Knight members' expressions, his lips curled up with disapproval. He had just shattered two scorching sun arrows. Why were they so surprised about that? The truth was, Zen didn't know that Supreme Lord Leroy had gained popularity through his fearsome arrows. The Supreme Lords in the universe all had different weapons, but Supreme Lord Leroy was the only one who used arrows as his main weapons. The arrows couldn't unleash martial artists' full strength, so even if certain world lords or Supreme Lords were proficient in archery, they only used arrows as their support. The heavenly destiny that Supreme Lord Leroy bore was called the Fixed Vision Theurgy. This kind of theurgy contained a type of extremely powerful law of causality. With the law of causality, the arrows he shot wouldn't follow the space law. As long as the targets were within his range of vision, the arrows were guaranteed to hit them. If Supreme Lord Leroy was capable of seeing all the way to the other side of the universe, then the arrows he shot would be able to cross the infinite distance and hit his target exactly where he planned to. Clearly, this explained why the Fixed Vision Theurgy was terrifying. Throughout the entire evolutionary universe, no one could stop his arrows, not even the human top-rank Supreme Lords. Zen and Abby had dodged the first and second arrows because they had hidden themselves in the corner and had escaped from Supreme Lord Leroy's sight. But now, Zen was in his plain view. With a single wave of his sword, Zen was capable of shattering two of Supreme Lord Leroy's scorching sun arrows. This was simply unimaginable. In a certain way, it was possible to say that Zen had broken the law of causality contained in the Fixed Vision Theurgy. Or rather, he had broken the law of causality of this universe. He held his great weighty sword horizontally in front of his chest and shouted into the darkness, "Supreme Lord Leroy, I'm Zen Luo. Shoot." Seeing two golden lights flashing in front of him, Zen turned around and pulled the great weighty sword he held in his hand. The long sword danced in the air and once again, accurately shattered the two scorching sun arrows sent by Leroy. Now, Zen was starting to get impatient. Supreme Lord Leroy was hiding in the darkness for no reason, and just kept shooting arrows at him. Whoosh! With the great weighty sword in his hand, Zen's figure began rapidly charging forward into the darkness. Whenever a golden light flashed out from his pitch-black surroundings, Zen's great weighty sword was capable of instantly capturing its trajectory and hack it into multiple pieces. Finally, Zen sprinted forward one last time, his great weighty sword slicing through the air and pressing down on Supreme Lord Leroy's neck. Supreme Lord Leroy, I didn't mean to offend you. I am. You're Zen Luo. I know you, an old voice sounded from the darkness. Suddenly, the light gradually brightened, revealing a lonely and rather thin old man. The old man sat on a stone bed and held a longbow in his hand. He looked like someone who was playing a zither, but his eyes were abnormally calm. Although he appeared very old, his eyes were very clear, and he had a set of determined eagle eyes. Since you know who I am, why did you? Zen trailed off. Supreme Lord Leroy smiled and placed his longbow to the side. Zen also placed his great weighty sword back into its scabbard. After all, the heavy weight of the weapon in his hand was a burden to him. I'm very curious. How did you shatter my arrows? Supreme Lord Leroy asked, as he looked at Zen questioningly. Ever since he bore the heavenly destiny, no one had been able to avoid his arrows, at least not as far as his eyes could reach. Because of the law of causality, when he looked directly at his opponents, it became impossible for them to dodge his attack. Of course, this reality was one of the reasons why the law of causality was so frightening. Nothing could happen without a cause. Although the scorching sun arrow wasn't Supreme Lord Leroy's strongest archery skill, the law of causality couldn't be violated. Therefore, he was surprised to see Zen smash his arrows to pieces. Hearing the conversation between Zen and Supreme Lord Leroy, the Demon Knight members hiding in the far corner began creeping out of the shadows. Supreme Lord Leroy's gaze was focused on Zen. Can you tell me how you managed that, please? Zen cupped his hands. I'm afraid I can't because there are a few secrets involved. In fact, Zen hadn't broken the law of causality contained within the fixed vision theurgy. He used another method to shatter Supreme Lord Leroy's scorching sun arrows, and that was nothing other than the world's will and memories. Zen knew everything. Before Supreme Lord Leroy had even raised his hand, Zen had already known when he would shoot his arrow and what the target would be. With this kind of magical foresight, he could swing his sword ahead of time and shatter Supreme Lord Leroy's scorching sun arrows as they came for him. Chapter 1620. The Blood-Devouring Bone Arrows. Supreme Lord Leroy gave Zen a meaningful look. Earlier in the year when the young man appeared in the universe with Lavender, the Supreme Lord closely kept tabs on them. He had been hiding in the depths of this place for many years and had never seen the geniuses born in the world of chaos. This was his first time meeting Zen, and the young man made quite a shocking first impression. Zen used his sword to cut off Supreme Lord Leroy's scorching sun arrows, breaking through his fixed vision theurgy, which was a technique he had obtained from his heavenly destiny. The law of causality contained within that theurgy came from the heavens. How did Zen manage to break it? He did it with such effortless finesse that it was terrifying. Supreme Lord Leroy burned with curiosity. Unfortunately for him, Zen refused to give him any answers as to how he managed to do it. Behind Zen were multiple Demon Knight members. I didn't expect the Demon Knight race to reach this stage. It seems like our race is going to perish, Supreme Lord Leroy remarked indifferently. Ever since the battle between Elena and Lavender, the entire Demon Knight race fell into crippling, internal strife. It didn't help that the two remaining queens of the race went ahead and allied themselves with the sacred race, which was definitely far from what Supreme Lord Leroy wanted. Abby, one of the Demon Knight race's Grand World Lords, stepped forward and bowed in front of the Supreme Lord. Supreme Lord Leroy, now that the Demon Knight race is under that woman's control, we are now in great trouble. I hope to the heavens that you can help the Saint Spear sect. Sammy and Fanny had unnatural expressions on their faces when they heard what Abby said. Not all of the people present were from the Saint Spear sect. Only about half belonged there. Sammy and Fanny weren't part of the Saint Spear sect, but still chose to follow Zen here. On the one hand, they did not approve of Elena's actions. On the other hand, all the prisoners they were supposed to be guarding on the prison island had escaped, which they no doubt would answer for in the future. They were still from the Saint Chain sect. Ever since their youth, they had always believed in the Queen of Punishment. Hearing Abby talk badly about her made them quite uncomfortable. Regardless of their discomfort though, they believed that she was right. I know, Supreme Lord Leroy affirmed. He might have been hidden deep underground all these years, but pieces of news that were announced through the roaring tokens supplied him with just enough information to know what was currently happening in the universe. Where's Lavender? Why didn't she come out to see me? The person he cared about the most was Lavender. He had hidden for so many years, but the moment Zen had brought Lavender back, he had been the first to respond. So why didn't he see her given Zen was already here? This question was actually what was also in the minds of all Demon Knight members. They could clearly feel Lavender's aura on the prison island, but why did she never appear? A trace of sadness appeared on Zen's face. How is she? Supreme Lord Leroy asked, already feeling nervous about Zen's expression. The young man's eyes flashed and a red light shot out from his pupils. He summoned his sword spirit out of his body along with Lavender's soul. Both his sword spirit and Lavender fused into one. At that moment, however, Lavender merely floated with her eyes shut. It was as if she were a mere, inanimate puppet. Plop, 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 all the Demon Knight members of the Saint Spear sect bent down on one knee at the sight of Lavender. Sammy and Fanny also showed their respect despite a moment of hesitation. Despite everything, Lavender was still one of their queens. How could this be? Even Supreme Lord Leroy couldn't believe the sight in front of him. Lavender's soul had not completely disappeared, so why did she look like this? He could still clearly feel her soul. Lavender's soul hadn't been completely destroyed, however, she was not completely whole. The soul-sealing needle that had embedded itself into her soul had to be erased. To do that, Lavender's memories had to be sacrificed. Right now, her mind was a blank slate, devoid of both memories and emotions. Her memories have been erased along with the soul-sealing needle. Zen explained. He then told Supreme Lord Leroy the deduction of the soul-sealing needle in Murphy's scheme. Supreme Lord Leroy couldn't help but sigh. So that's how it is. I always thought that no matter how crazy Elena is, she couldn't possibly bring the Demon Knight race down to this. Now I know why. It turns out we were actually hiding such a secret. Elena was very ambitious, but all of her plans were centered around the Demon Knight race. However, right now, her declaration of war against the entire universe was sure to plunge the entire Demon Knight race into destruction. This was a bit strange. Zen's words gave the Demon Knight members present much-needed clarity. Indeed, no one would have ever thought that the members of the Demon Knight race weren't born in this universe. But given Lavender's situation, what should we do? Supreme Lord Leroy asked. Zen shook his head in defeat. I don't know either. A person's soul was complex and mysterious. Nobody in this universe had ever sought out to learn the mysteries of the soul, let alone the memories within it. How could Lavender's memories ever be recovered? Zen had absolutely no clue. I will do my best to help her, Zen promised. He then waved his hand and Lavender's soul returned back into his body. Zen turned towards the Demon Knight members. At present, I need your help. The Demon Knight race needs a new leader. Supreme Lord Leroy was once Lavender's guardian, so he had quite a stellar reputation in their race. According to the information Zen managed to gather, the Demon Knight sects weren't faring quite well. The Saint Spear sect had already fallen apart while the other 5 remained dissatisfied with Elena and Latonia. The elites still followed the 2 queens, but were already regretting their decision. The Supreme Lords of the Demon Knight race had no choice though. The 2 queens wielded absolute power over the entire race and going against them was quite difficult. However, if Supreme Lord Leroy came out on behalf of Lavender, then they could turn the situation around. His emergence might very well give all the Demon Knight members a second chance. Ha. Supreme Lord Leroy suddenly let out a loud laugh, though there was a tinge of misery in his mirth. Will you be willing to do it? Zen asked. Of course I'm willing to do it. This is what I've been waiting for. He answered with gusto. Come with me. It seemed that the old Supreme Lord was now bursting with energy. He suddenly stood up and lifted the stone bed beneath him. Clang! The heavy stone bed smashed into the ground revealing a set of stairs that descended down. There seemed to be a hidden cave underneath. The moment the cave was opened, the heavy stench of blood permeated the air. Supreme Lord Leroy was the first to walk down, followed closely by Zen. Despite their curiosity, the Demon Knight members dared not follow. As the 2 descended, Zen discovered a small cave. In the middle was a crevice where 3 bloody arrows stuck out of. The moment he saw those arrows, Zen suddenly felt his soul stir. It was as if those arrows were coming for him and just one strike would be enough to kill him. Supreme Lord Leroy noticed his gaze and beamed proudly. These 3 arrows were made from my own ribs. They're called the blood-devouring bone arrows. His words puzzled Zen greatly. It feels as if these arrows are living things. Zen didn't know how, but he felt the breath of life from these 3 arrows. Supreme Lord Leroy smiled even wider. These 3 blood-devouring bone arrows are connected to my life force. Every time I shoot one, my life will decline by a third. Once all 3 arrows are shot, my life is over. Zen's expression quickly changed when he heard this. 3 arrows forged with the life of a Supreme Lord. Just how powerful could they be? I've been forging these 3 arrows ever since I went into hiding. Finally, this day has come.